My phone buzzed while I stood on a hiking trail 3,000 feet above sea level watching golden aspen leaves dance in the Colorado breeze. Dad's name flashed on the screen and my stomach dropped. He never called unless something was wrong or he needed something from me. "Mona, you need to come home for Jake's wedding in 2 weeks." His voice boomed through the speaker without any greeting. "We need to look like the perfect family for Emma's parents." I stared at the Rocky Mountains stretching endlessly before me. "Dad, I live in Colorado now." Complete silence. "What do you mean, Colorado?" His confusion was genuine raw. The devastating truth hit me like a punch to the chest. 10 months. 10 whole months since I'd packed everything I owned into a rented moving truck and driven 1,500 miles west to start over. 10 months of building a new life, finding genuine friends, getting promoted, falling in love. 10 months of complete silence from the people who were supposed to be my family. They never noticed I was gone. After Dad hung up abruptly, promising to call back later, I sat on a boulder overlooking the Continental Divide and opened my phone with shaking fingers. The family group chat I'd left months ago was still there in my message history. I scrolled through 10 months of messages I hadn't seen. Mom's daily updates painted a picture of a family that had seamlessly continued without me. Photos of Jake and Emma trying wedding cakes, touring venues, shopping for rings. Pictures from family dinners at Romano's restaurant, the Italian place where we celebrated every milestone. Group shots from Emma's bridal shower where my Aunt Carol held up gifts and grinned at the camera. But it was the holiday photos that shattered what remained of my heart. Thanksgiving dinner, November 26th. Mom had posted 15 pictures of the dining room table decorated with her grandmother's china and fall centerpieces. Jake carved the turkey while Emma laughed beside him. Dad raised a glass of wine toward the camera. Everyone looked radiant, grateful, complete. My chair wasn't even at the table. Christmas morning was worse. The living room overflowed with red and green wrapping paper, the tree twinkling with lights I'd helped string for 28 years of my life. Jake and Emma cuddled on the couch surrounded by opened presents. Mom's caption read, "All my children are home for the holidays, feeling so blessed to have my family together." All my children, as if I'd never existed. Easter brunch featured the same cast of characters gathered around Mom's buffet spread. Dad wore his navy blazer, the one I'd given him 3 years ago for Father's Day. Jake had his arm around Emma as they posed next to Mom's famous carrot cake. The caption this time, "Perfect Sunday with my perfect family." I kept scrolling, looking for any mention of my absence, any question about where I was, any concern that their daughter and sister had vanished from their lives completely. Nothing. Instead, I found evidence of a family that had collectively decided I was better off forgotten. At Jake's birthday dinner in February, they'd pushed the chairs closer together around their usual table, eliminating the gap where I would have sat. When Mom posted about spring cleaning in March, she mentioned donating extra bedroom furniture we don't need anymore to Goodwill. My childhood bedroom had been converted into Emma's wedding planning headquarters, complete with a dress form and fabric samples covering every surface. The final blow came in a video Mom posted from Emma's engagement party in April. She'd panned the camera across the backyard, showing off her garden and the decorations she'd spent weeks preparing. Family and friends mingled on the deck, laughing and toasting the happy couple. As the camera swept past the picnic table, I caught a glimpse of place cards arranged in neat rows. I rewound and paused the video, zooming in until I could read the elegant calligraphy. Jake Miller, Emma Richardson, David Miller, Patricia Miller, Uncle Tom, Aunt Carol, Cousin Sarah. No Mona Miller anywhere in sight. They hadn't just failed to notice my absence. They'd actively erased me from their narrative, reorganized their lives around the assumption that I was never coming back, and presented themselves to their community as a complete, happy family of 4 instead of 5. Sitting on that mountain surrounded by the vast wilderness that had become my sanctuary, I realized I'd been grieving people who had buried me long before I even knew I was dead to them. The memory of why I'd fled to Colorado came rushing back as I hiked down the mountain trail, my hiking boots crunching on fallen leaves that reminded me of Ohio autumns I'd never see again. It started with Grandma Rose's funeral 18 months ago. She'd been the anchor of our family, the one person who treated me like I mattered, who called every Sunday just to hear about my week. When the lawyer read her will at the family meeting, he mentioned a college fund she'd established for me when I was 5 years old, intended to cover my graduate school tuition. Mona's Educational Trust, he'd called it, consulting his papers. Originally funded with $50,000, it should have grown substantially over the years with compound interest. But when we went to the bank to access the account, it was empty. Dad shifted uncomfortably in his chair while Mom studied her manicured fingernails. Jake stared at his phone like the most fascinating thing in the world was happening on his Instagram feed. "There must be some mistake," I'd said to the bank manager, a kind woman with gray hair and sympathetic eyes. "Can you show us the transaction history?" The statements told a story that made my blood run cold. Monthly withdrawals had started 12 years ago, small amounts at first, then larger chunks as I approached graduation. The money had been systematically drained to pay for Jake's college tuition, his apartment rent, his car payments, his spring break trips to Cancun. My inheritance had funded my brother's entire adult life, while I'd worked 3 part-time jobs to pay for community college and lived in a studio apartment that smelled like cat litter and cigarettes. When I confronted my parents that night, they'd staged a performance worthy of Broadway. Mom claimed she had no memory of any educational trust, suggesting maybe Grandma Rose had been confused in her final years. Dad insisted the money had been spent for the family good, and that I was being selfish and greedy to question their financial decisions. "You always cause drama," Jake had added from the couch, not even looking up from his video game. "Grandma Rose wanted her money to help the family, not just you. Besides, I needed that money for school. You could have gotten scholarships if you'd tried harder." The gaslighting was so complete, so coordinated, that I almost believed I was the problem. Maybe I was remembering wrong. Maybe I was being entitled. Maybe I was the kind of person who would steal from her own family and then accuse them of theft. But I'd kept copies of Grandma Rose's original documents stored in a fireproof box she'd given me when I turned 18. Her handwriting was clear and firm: "For my granddaughter Mona's education, so she can build the life she deserves." I hired a lawyer with my savings from my marketing assistant job. The investigation revealed a pattern of financial abuse that went beyond simple theft. Dad had forged my signature on documents transferring the account into his name. Mom had lied to the bank about my consent to the withdrawals. Jake had knowingly accepted money that belonged to me, using it to pay for luxuries while I struggled to afford textbooks. The lawyer assured me we had a strong case for criminal charges and full restitution. But as I sat in his office looking at evidence of my family's betrayal spread across his conference table, I realized something that changed everything. I didn't want their money anymore. I wanted my freedom. Fighting them would mean years of legal battles, family therapy sessions where they'd blame me for tearing the family apart, and a lifetime of being cast as the villain who destroyed their perfect facade. Even if I won, I'd still be tied to people who saw me as an obstacle to their happiness rather than someone worthy of love and respect. So I made a different choice. I took the job offer in Denver that I'd been considering, sold everything I couldn't fit in my Honda Civic, and disappeared into the mountains like smoke. I thought they'd notice. I thought someone would call and ask where I was, why I'd left, whether I was okay. I thought maybe the shock of my absence would make them realize what they'd lost and motivate them to make things right. Instead, they'd thrown an engagement party without me and converted my bedroom into a wedding planning studio. The first 3 months in Colorado had been the loneliest of my life, but also the most liberating. I'd rented a 1-bedroom apartment in a complex that overlooked the foothills, where I could see the sunrise paint the mountains gold every morning. My neighbors were transplants, like me, people who'd chosen adventure over familiarity and ended up creating the most genuine community I'd ever experienced. There was Janet from apartment 2, B, a retired teacher from Michigan who'd moved west to be closer to her grandchildren and spent her days volunteering at the animal shelter. She'd knocked on my door during my first week with a homemade casserole and an invitation to join her weekly hiking group. Through Janet, I'd met Marcus, a software engineer from Atlanta, who'd traded his corporate job for freelance work that let him ski every powder day. And through Marcus, I'd met the group that would become my chosen family. The hiking crew met every Saturday at sunrise, regardless of weather or season. We'd pile into whoever had the most reliable four-wheel drive vehicle and head into the wilderness, chasing waterfalls in summer and snowshoeing through silent forests in winter. These people celebrated my promotion at work with champagne on a mountaintop. They threw me a birthday party complete with a surprise cake shaped like the Colorado state flag. When I got food poisoning from a sketchy burrito truck, 3 of them showed up with soup and stayed to watch terrible movies until I felt human again. This was what family was supposed to feel like. My job at Evergreen Outdoor Gear had started as a basic marketing coordinator position, the kind of entry-level role that paid the bills while I figured out my next move. But Colorado had awakened something creative in me that I'd never known existed. The thin air and endless sky seemed to clear my mind of all the noise and drama that had cluttered my thoughts in Ohio. When the company launched their new line of sustainable camping equipment, I'd proposed a social media campaign that focused on real stories from real outdoor enthusiasts rather than polished influencer photos. I'd interviewed dozens of customers about their adventures, from weekend warriors discovering their local trails to through hikers completing the Continental Divide Trail. The campaign had gone viral beyond anyone's expectations. Videos of a 70-year-old grandmother completing her first 14er and a disabled veteran using adaptive equipment to return to rock climbing had been shared millions of times. Major outdoor publications picked up the stories, and sales exceeded projections by 300%. My boss, a laid-back former ski racer named Tony, had called me into his office 6 months after the campaign launch. I'd expected feedback on my quarterly performance review. Instead, he'd offered me the newly created position of Director of Brand Storytelling, with a salary that was nearly double what I'd been making, and equity in the company. You understand something about authentic connection that most marketers never figure out, he'd told me, leaning back in his chair with his feet propped on his desk. You make people feel seen and valued, not sold to. That's rare. The $60,000 signing bonus had allowed me to buy a 2-bedroom condo in a complex that backed up to open space where deer grazed outside my kitchen window, and I could see 4 different mountain peaks from my living room. For the first time in my adult life, I had financial security that didn't depend on anyone else's approval or generosity. But the money wasn't even the best part of my new life. That honor belonged to Austin. I'd met him during a volunteer trail cleanup event that Evergreen Outdoor Gear had sponsored. He'd been crouched beside a stream, carefully photographing water samples while wearing a T-shirt that read, "Water Quality Matters," in faded letters that suggested it was his favorite piece of clothing. When I'd approached to ask what he was doing, he'd launched into a passionate explanation of aquatic ecosystem monitoring that was simultaneously nerdy and charming. Austin was an environmental scientist for the state, the kind of person who could identify bird calls during dinner conversations, and got genuinely excited about soil composition reports. He grew vegetables in his backyard, composted his food scraps, and rode his bike to work even when the temperature dropped below 0. Everything about him was genuine, thoughtful, and kind. Our first official date had been a sunrise hike to Twin Sisters Peak, where we'd shared granola bars and coffee from his thermos while watching the sun illuminate the Continental Divide. He'd listened without judgment as I told him about my family situation, offering insights that came from someone who'd grown up with parents who actually supported their children's dreams. Healthy families celebrate when their kids become independent, he'd said, adjusting his baseball cap against the morning glare. They don't punish them for growing up. 8 months later, we were talking about moving in together and planning backpacking trips that would take us deep into wilderness areas where cell phone service couldn't reach us, and the drama of the outside world felt like something that happened to other people. My social media feeds told the story of a life I'd never imagined possible. Photos from company retreats and Moab weekend camping trips with friends, farmers, market adventures with Austin, where we'd sample artisan cheeses and debate the merits of different varieties of heirloom tomatoes. I'd posted about my promotion, my new condo, my first successful attempt at making sourdough bread from scratch. Not one person from my family had liked, commented, or even viewed any of it. I checked the analytics obsessively for the first few months, hoping to see familiar names in my engagement reports. But my family had apparently unfollowed me on every platform, completing their erasure of me from their digital lives as thoroughly as they'd eliminated me from their physical presence. Dad called back 3 hours later, just as I was preparing dinner in my condo kitchen, where the windows framed a view of the foothills that never failed to calm my nerves. Austin was due over in an hour with ingredients for his famous vegetarian chili, and I'd been looking forward to a quiet evening cooking together and planning our upcoming weekend trip to Great Sand Dunes National Park. "We need to talk." Dad's voice carried that authoritative tone he'd used throughout my childhood, the one that brooked no argument and expected immediate compliance. I put him on speaker and continued chopping bell peppers, determined not to let him derail the peaceful life I'd built. "I'm listening. This wedding is important, Mona. Emma's family has money, real money, and they're judging us. We can't have them thinking our family is dysfunctional." The irony was so thick I could have cut it with my knife. "Our family is dysfunctional, Dad. Don't be dramatic. Every family has problems, but we work through them. That's what families do. They show up for each other when it matters." I set down my knife and gripped the edge of the granite countertop. "Where were you when I needed you to show up, when I was working 3 jobs to pay for school while Jake was living off money that was supposed to be mine?" "That's ancient history. We're talking about the future now, Jake's future. This wedding could set him up for life if we handle it right." "And what about my life? What about the fact that none of you noticed I moved across the country 10 months ago?" Dad's sigh carried through the phone like he was dealing with an unreasonable child having a tantrum. "You disappeared without telling anyone. How are we supposed to know where you went?" "I posted about my move on social media. I sent my new address to Mom. I called Jake to let him know I was leaving town." "Well, things have been busy with wedding planning. It's not personal, Mona. You know how your mother gets when she's stressed." The minimization felt like a slap. 10 months of complete absence reduced to wedding stress and busy schedules, as if I were a distant acquaintance they'd lost touch with, rather than their daughter and sister. "Here's what's gonna happen." Dad continued, shifting into his business negotiation voice. "You're going to come home for the wedding. You're going to smile, be polite to Emma's family, and help us show them that the Millers are the kind of people they want connected to their daughter. After the wedding, we can sit down and work through whatever issues you think we need to address." No. The word surprised me with its finality. I'd spent 28 years trying to please this man, contorting myself into shapes that would earn his approval, accepting crumbs of affection when what I needed was a feast of genuine love. "Excuse me." I said no. I'm not coming to Jake's wedding. I'm not going to pretend we're a happy family for the benefit of people I've never met. And I'm especially not going to help you manipulate Emma's family into thinking you're decent people when you've spent the last 18 months stealing from your own daughter and then acting like she never existed. Now you listen to me, young lady. Dad's voice dropped into the dangerous register that had terrified me as a child. That money went to help this family, and if you can't see the bigger picture, that's your problem. But I'm not going to let you ruin Jake's chance at happiness because you're holding grudges. Holding grudges, Dad, you stole my inheritance. You let me struggle financially while you funded Jake's entire lifestyle. You didn't even notice when I left the state. And whose fault is that you made your choice when you decided to be difficult about the money situation? You can't just disappear and then expect us to chase after you. That's not how the real world works. I walked to my living room window where the setting sun was painting the mountains in shades of orange and pink that never failed to remind me why I'd chosen this life over the one they'd offered me in Ohio. You're right, I said quietly. That's not how the real world works. In the real world, when you steal from someone, there are consequences. When you ignore someone's existence, they build a life without you. When you treat someone like they don't matter, eventually they believe you and stop trying to matter to you. Don't threaten me, Mona. You think you're independent now, but you're still part of this family whether you like it or not, and families have obligations to each other. What obligations, Dad? What exactly do I owe any of you? Loyalty, respect, the understanding that sometimes individual desires have to be sacrificed for the greater good. Your grandmother understood that. She'd be disappointed to see how selfish you've become. The mention of Grandma Rose felt like a physical blow. Dad knew exactly which buttons to push, which wounds were still tender enough to reopen with minimal effort. Don't you dare use Grandma Rose to justify what you did. She left that money specifically for my education, and you stole it. She'd be horrified by what you've done to this family. What I've done, I've held this family together while you ran off to Colorado to play house with strangers. But here's something you might want to consider before you get too comfortable out there in your little fantasy world. Dad paused, and I could practically hear the manipulation gears turning in his head. Grandma Rose's will has some interesting provisions about inheritance distribution. Specifically, it states that her estate can only be divided among grandchildren who maintain family unity and participation in significant family events. If you're not at Jake's wedding, if you're not demonstrating your commitment to this family, I can contest your claim to any future inheritance on the grounds that you abandoned your family obligations. My mouth went dry. What are you talking about? I'm talking about the rest of Grandma Rose's estate, Mona. The house, the investments, the life insurance policies, everything gets divided equally between her grandchildren, but only if they're active participants in family life. Weddings definitely qualify as significant family events. You can't be serious. I'm completely serious. Come to the wedding smile for the photos show Emma's family that we raised you right, and you'll get your share of the inheritance when the time comes. Refuse and I'll file paperwork with the court arguing that you've forfeited your rights by abandoning the family. Jake will inherit everything. I sank onto my couch, the enormity of the manipulation crashing over me like a mountain avalanche. This wasn't about family unity or wedding photos or Emma's parents. This was about money and control, and making sure that even from 1,500 miles away, I couldn't escape the web of obligation and guilt they'd spent decades weaving around me. I need time to think about this. You have 24 hours. The wedding is in 2 weeks, and if you're coming, we need to know now so your mother can arrange the seating charts and order your bridesmaid dress. Emma specifically requested that you be in the wedding party, which shows how generous and forgiving she is despite your behavior. Emma requested that I be in the wedding party, Emma, who I've never met, and who's been planning this wedding for months while I've been living in Colorado. She's a lovely girl, Mona, kind and understanding. The type of person who values family unity and would be hurt to learn that Jake's sister couldn't be bothered to attend his wedding. The manipulation was so layered, so expertly crafted, that I almost admired its artistry. Emma became the innocent victim, I became the selfish villain, and the family became the wounded party trying to hold everything together despite my unreasonable behavior. I'll call you tomorrow, I said, reaching for the phone to end this conversation before I said something I couldn't take back. Make sure you do, and Mona, think carefully about what kind of person you want to be. The kind who shows up for family when it matters, or the kind who lets money and petty grievances destroy the relationships that are supposed to last forever. After he hung up, I sat in my living room as darkness settled over the mountains, wondering how someone could make theft sound like generosity and abandonment sound like betrayal. Outside my window, Austin's headlights swept across the parking lot as he arrived for our dinner date, carrying grocery bags and wearing the smile that had become my favorite sight in the world. For the first time since moving to Colorado, I wondered if the life I'd built was strong enough to withstand the gravitational pull of a family that seemed determined to drag me back into their orbit, even if it meant destroying everything I'd worked so hard to create. The next morning, while I was still nursing my first cup of coffee and staring at the mountain view that usually brought me peace, my phone rang again. This time it was Jake, and something in his voice made me pause before sending him to voicemail like I'd been doing for months. "Mona, please don't hang up. I need to talk to you, and not because Dad told me to call." I walked onto my balcony where the morning air was crisp enough to make me shiver in my pajamas. "What do you want, Jake?" "I want to tell you something that I probably should have said 18 months ago." His voice was quieter than I'd ever heard it, stripped of the cocky confidence that had defined him since childhood. "I know what Mom and Dad did with Grandma Rose's money was wrong. I knew it when it was happening, and I should have said something." The admission hit me like a physical shock. In all our family arguments, Jake had never once acknowledged that our parents had done anything inappropriate, let alone illegal. "Then why didn't you—" Because I was a selfish coward who was more worried about losing my free ride than doing the right thing for my sister. He paused, and I could hear traffic in the background suggesting he was calling from his car where no one could overhear. "And because I convinced myself that you were stronger than me, that you'd figure out a way to land on your feet no matter what happened. I told myself I was protecting my own future, but really, I was just protecting my comfort." I gripped the balcony railing, not trusting myself to respond without saying something I might regret. "Emma's family is coming to dinner tonight." Jake continued his words, tumbling out like he was afraid I'd hang up before he could finish. "Her parents, her grandfather, who basically built their family fortune, her two brothers who both went to Harvard Business School. They're flying in from Connecticut on their private jet to meet us and decide whether I'm worthy of marrying their daughter. And you think having me there will somehow convince them that you're worthy? No, actually, I think having you there might be the only honest thing about this entire charade." Jake's laugh was bitter, self-aware in a way I'd never heard from him before. "You want to know the truth about Emma's family? They're not just rich Mona. They're old money, the kind of people who trace their lineage back to the Mayflower and have buildings at Yale named after them. Emma's trust fund is worth more than Dad makes in a lifetime, but it comes with conditions." I walked back inside, settling into the chair by my window where Austin and I usually ate breakfast together. "What kind of conditions?" "Marriage conditions. If she marries someone, her family approves of someone who demonstrates good character and strong family values, the money flows freely. If she marries someone they consider beneath their standards, the trust fund gets frozen until she turns 45 or until she divorces whoever they disapprove of. So this is about money after all. It's about more than money." Jake's voice cracked slightly, and I realized with shock that my brother was actually crying. "I love her, Mona. I know that probably sounds impossible given what you know about me, but I love Emma more than I've ever loved anything in my life. She makes me want to be better than I am. She makes me want to deserve her." I'd been prepared for manipulation threats, guilt trips, all the usual weapons in our family's arsenal. I hadn't been prepared for genuine vulnerability from the brother who'd spent our entire childhood treating me like an inconvenient obstacle to his happiness. "What does Emma think about all this?" "She doesn't know about the trust fund conditions. Her parents told me privately as a warning. They said that marriage is about more than individual feelings, that it's about joining families and maintaining standards. They want to see how I handle family stress, how I prioritize loyalty, whether I come from the kind of people who stick together when things get difficult. And you think me showing up to smile for photos will convince them that we're the kind of family who sticks together? I think you not showing up will convince them that we're the kind of family who falls apart over money disputes and petty grudges. They'll see it as a red flag about my character proof that I can't maintain important relationships or resolve conflicts like an adult." I stood up and began pacing around my living room energy building inside me that had nowhere to go. "Jake, do you hear yourself right now? You're asking me to participate in a lie to help you manipulate Emma's family into believing you're something you're not. I'm asking you to help me become the person Emma thinks I am." His voice was pleading now, desperate in a way that reminded me of when we were children and he'd broken something valuable and needed my help to fix it before our parents found out. She believes I come from a good family, that I was raised with strong values, that I know how to treat the people I love with respect and kindness. She doesn't know about the money thing because I was too ashamed to tell her. So tell her now. If she really loves you, she'll understand. Will she? Would you, if you found out that the person you were planning to marry had stood by and watched while his parents stole from his sister? That he'd benefited from that theft for years without saying anything? That his family was so dysfunctional that his sister moved across the country to get away from them and they didn't even notice she was gone? The questions hung in the air between us, and I realized that Jake understood the gravity of our family's dysfunction better than I'd given him credit for. He wasn't just worried about losing Emma's trust fund. He was terrified of losing Emma herself once she learned who he really was and where he came from. Mona, I know I don't have the right to ask you for anything after what happened. I know I should have defended you, should have spoken up, should have been a better brother. But I'm begging you now, not for Mom and Dad, not for the money, but for me. Help me be worthy of the woman I love. I closed my eyes and tried to imagine what my life would look like if I gave in. Flying back to Ohio, pretending to be the happy sister, standing in Emma's wedding party like nothing had happened. Smiling for photos that would be posted on social media as evidence of our perfect family unity. Watching Jake promise to love and honor Emma while knowing he'd built their relationship on a foundation of lies and omissions. What happens after the wedding, Jake? Do I just disappear back to Colorado and pretend this conversation never happened? Do we go back to not speaking for another 10 months? I don't know. I hope not. I hope maybe this could be the start of something different between us. I hope maybe I could figure out how to be the brother you deserved all along. And Mom and Dad, what about the money they stole from me? What about the fact that they've erased me from the family narrative and treated me like I never existed? Jake was quiet for so long that I wondered if the call had dropped. Finally he spoke, and his voice was barely above a whisper. I set aside money every month for the last year and a half. Not much at first because I didn't have much, but more recently since I got the promotion at work. I've been putting it in a separate account telling myself it was for emergencies. But really, I think I always knew it was for you, to try to pay back at least some of what was taken from you. How much? $42,000 so far. I know it's not enough, not even close, but it's what I can do right now. And if you come to the wedding, if you help me get through this, I'll sign papers transferring the entire amount to you, regardless of what happens with Emma's family or the inheritance or anything else. $42,000. It wouldn't replace what had been stolen from me, but it would pay off my student loans completely and give me a substantial emergency fund. More importantly, it represented something I'd never expected from Jake: acknowledgement that he owed me a debt and a genuine attempt to make things right. I need to think about this. I understand. But Mona, there's something else you should know. Emma hired a private investigator to research our family background. It's apparently something her family does with all potential spouses, just standard due diligence for people with their level of wealth. If you're not at the wedding, if our family appears fractured or dysfunctional, that investigator is going to dig deeper and probably discover things that will destroy any chance I have with her. What kind of things? The theft charges you could have filed, the financial disputes, the fact that you moved across the country to get away from us. All the things that would prove her family was right to be concerned about letting me marry into their circle. I sank back into my chair, overwhelmed by the complexity of the situation Jake had laid out. This wasn't just about a wedding anymore. It was about the ripple effects of our family's dysfunction, the way past choices were now threatening to destroy future possibilities. I'll call you back in a few hours, I said finally. Thank you, and Mona. For what it's worth, I'm proud of what you've built in Colorado. I've been following your social media posts even though I never liked or commented. Your life looks amazing, and you look happy in a way I don't remember seeing when you lived here. You deserve all the good things that have come your way. After he hung up, I sat in the morning sunlight streaming through my windows and tried to process everything he'd told me. My brother, who I'd written off as irredeemably selfish and manipulative, had revealed depths of self-awareness and genuine remorse that caught me completely off guard. But was it enough? Was his fear of losing Emma and his offer of partial financial restitution worth returning to a family dynamic that had nearly destroyed my sense of self-worth? Was helping him build a marriage on a foundation of concealed truth the right thing to do even if his intentions were sincere? My phone buzzed with a text from Austin. "How did the family call go? Still on for lunch later. I have news about the backpacking permits for next month." Looking at his message at the evidence of the life I'd built with people who valued honesty and authenticity above all else, I realized that Jake's crisis was asking me to choose between two versions of myself: the person I'd been in Ohio, who prioritized family harmony over personal integrity, and the person I'd become in Colorado, who had learned to value truth even when it was uncomfortable. The question was whether those two versions could coexist, or whether helping Jake would require me to sacrifice the growth I'd fought so hard to achieve. That afternoon, while Jake's confession was still echoing in my mind, I found myself digging through boxes in my closet that I hadn't opened since moving to Colorado. I was looking for old photo albums, maybe some clarity about who our family had been before money and manipulation had poisoned everything. Instead, I found something that changed everything I thought I knew about my grandmother's intentions. Tucked inside my high school yearbook between pages of signatures from classmates I'd completely forgotten was an envelope addressed to me in Grandma Rose's careful handwriting. The postmark was dated just 3 weeks before she died, but somehow I'd never seen it before. My hands trembled as I opened it, revealing 2 pages of the lavender stationery that Grandma Rose had used for all her important correspondence, the kind she'd ordered specially from a company in Vermont that had been making paper the same way for over a century. My dearest Mona. It began, and I could practically hear her voice in every carefully chosen word. If you're reading this, it means I'm gone and you've discovered what your parents have done with your educational fund. I wish I could say I'm surprised, but I've been watching their behavior with growing concern for several years now. I want you to know that I am aware of the monthly withdrawals from your account. The bank sends me statements as the original account holder, and I've been documenting every transaction. I also want you to know that I am not angry with you for this theft, nor do I blame you for whatever decision you make about how to handle it. Your parents have always struggled with the concept that love cannot be purchased or manipulated. They believe that providing material comfort is the same as providing emotional support, that controlling outcomes is the same as ensuring happiness. They have never understood that real strength comes from facing consequences, not avoiding them. I have watched you work 3 jobs to pay for school while your brother lived comfortably off money that was meant to ensure your future. I've seen you sacrifice your own needs to keep peace in a family that takes your kindness for granted. I've witnessed you shrink yourself down to fit into spaces that were never designed to hold someone with your spirit and potential. This stops now. There are things your parents don't know about my estate planning decisions I made specifically to protect you from their tendency to prioritize Jake's comfort over your well-being. I have purchased property in Colorado, a small cabin and 5 acres in the mountains outside of Denver that will belong to you regardless of what happens with the rest of my estate. I chose Colorado because you mentioned once during our last phone call that you dreamed of living somewhere with clean air and open spaces where you could be yourself without constantly managing other people's emotions. You probably don't remember saying it, but I wrote it down that night and began researching the area immediately. The property is currently being managed by a trust company in Denver called Rocky Mountain Estate Services. The papers are in my safety deposit box at First National Bank, along with a key that will be given to you after my death. The property is worth approximately $400,000 and is completely paid off. Your parents have no claim to it because I purchased it with money from accounts they never knew existed. I want you to understand something important. This gift comes with no strings attached. You don't have to move to Colorado to claim it. You don't have to forgive your parents or maintain relationships that harm you. You don't have to be the peacekeeper or the family mediator or the person who sacrifices her own happiness to keep everyone else comfortable. This property is yours because I love you, because I believe in your potential, and because I want you to have options that don't depend on other people's approval or generosity. Your parents will likely try to use the rest of my estate as leverage to control your behavior after I'm gone. They'll threaten to contest your inheritance, to cut you off from family events, to paint you as greedy or ungrateful if you don't comply with their demands. I want you to know that these threats are empty. I have structured my will specifically to prevent them from using my money to manipulate you. The main estate will indeed be divided between my grandchildren, but only the portions that I designate for general inheritance. Your Colorado property is separate, protected, and cannot be touched by anyone except you. Additionally, I have established a trust that will provide you with $50,000 per year for the next 10 years' money that was never part of the general estate and therefore cannot be contested or redistributed. I am telling you this because I want you to make decisions based on what feels right to you, not on what you think you owe to people who have repeatedly demonstrated that they value control more than your well-being. If you choose to forgive your parents and rebuild your relationship with them, do it because you genuinely want that connection in your life. If you choose to walk away and build your own family with people who appreciate your worth, do it with my blessing and my support. Either way, know that you are loved beyond measure by someone who saw your true self and found it worthy of protection and celebration. Your grandmother always, Rose Elizabeth Miller. P.S. The cabin has a wraparound porch that faces west toward the Continental Divide. I had it built specifically for watching sunsets and drinking tea, 2 activities I hope you'll enjoy there for many years to come. I read the letter 3 times before the full impact hit me. Grandma Rose had known about the theft and had taken steps to protect me from its consequences. More than that, she'd seen the dysfunction in our family dynamics clearly enough to create an escape route that none of them knew existed. $400,000 in Colorado property, plus $50,000 per year for 10 years. I was essentially a millionaire with financial security that made Dad's inheritance threats completely meaningless. But more than the money, what overwhelmed me was the evidence of love that the letter represented. Grandma Rose had listened to a casual comment I'd made during a phone call and turned it into a concrete plan for my future freedom. She'd seen through my family's manipulation tactics and built barriers to protect me from them. She'd loved me enough to ensure that I would never have to choose between my integrity and my financial security. I grabbed my laptop and immediately called Rocky Mountain Estate Services. After providing my identification and answering several security questions, they confirmed that yes, they'd been managing a property on my behalf for over 2 years, and yes, I could visit it any time I wanted. We've been maintaining it exactly as your grandmother specified. The property manager, a warm woman named Linda, explained over the phone. She was very particular about keeping it in perfect condition for when you were ready to claim it. She said you might need it someday as a refuge, and she wanted it to feel like home from the moment you arrived. The property was located 45 minutes outside of Denver, in a small mountain community called Pine Ridge that I'd driven through dozens of times during my weekend hiking trips. I'd always admired the area's combination of wilderness access and small-town charm, never imagining that I might actually own a piece of it. "Would you like me to arrange a viewing for this week?" Linda asked. I should warn you, your grandmother left very specific instructions about how the property should be presented to you for the first time. She wanted it to feel like a homecoming, not a business transaction. I made an appointment for the next morning, my heart racing with anticipation and gratitude, and something else I couldn't quite identify. For the first time since Dad's manipulative phone call, I felt like I had solid ground to stand on. Grandma Rose had given me something more valuable than money. She'd given me choices that didn't depend on anyone else's approval. That evening, I called Jake back with a clarity I hadn't felt in days. "I got your message about the money you've set aside." I told him, my voice steady and calm. And I appreciate the gesture, I really do, but I need you to understand something about why I can't come to your wedding. Mona, please just hear me out before you decide anything final. No, you hear me out for once. I'm not refusing to come because I want to hurt you or because I'm holding grudges or because I don't want you to be happy. I'm refusing to come because participating in that wedding would require me to lie about who we are as a family, and I've worked too hard to build an authentic life to compromise that now. But if Emma's family rejects me because of this, it will destroy everything I've worked for. Then maybe you need to have an honest conversation with Emma about who you really are and where you really come from. Maybe you need to trust that if she loves you, she'll love all of you, including the messy parts and the family dysfunction and the mistakes you've made. Jake was quiet for a long moment. What if she doesn't? What if knowing the truth changes how she feels about me? Then she's not the right person for you. And if her family's money comes with conditions that require you to pretend to be someone you're not, then maybe that money isn't worth having. Easy for you to say. You don't have to face losing the person you love because your family is a disaster. I smiled thinking about Austin and the way he'd listened without judgment when I'd told him about my family's theft and manipulation. Actually, Jake, I do know what it's like to face that choice. And I chose honesty. I told the person I love exactly who my family is and what they've done, and he's still here. That's how I know he's the right person for me. So you're really not coming? I'm really not coming. But Jake, I want you to know that this decision isn't about punishing you or making your life harder. It's about refusing to participate in a system that requires me to be less than who I really am in order to keep other people comfortable. I understand, he said quietly. I don't like it, but I understand it. Good. And Jake, if Emma really loves you, if she's really the person you think she is, then she'll understand too. Trust her with the truth. You might be surprised by how strong real love can be when it's not built on fantasy. After I hung up, I sat on my balcony and watched the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and purple that reminded me exactly why I'd fallen in love with this place. Tomorrow, I would visit the property that Grandma Rose had left me, the refuge she'd created because she understood that sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is the freedom to choose their own path. For the first time since this entire wedding crisis began, I felt like I was exactly where I belonged. The next morning, I was driving through the winding mountain roads toward Pine Ridge when my phone rang. The number was unfamiliar with a Connecticut area code that made me assume it was some kind of telemarketing call. Is this Mona Miller? The voice was female professional with the kind of crisp East Coast accent that suggested expensive education and old family money. Yes, who's calling? This is Emma Richardson. I believe you're Jake's sister. I pulled over at a scenic overlook, my heart suddenly pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. This was the woman my brother was planning to marry, the one whose family's approval had become the center of our entire family drama. Yes, I'm Jake's sister. How did you get my number? I hired a private investigator to research your family background. I hope you'll forgive the intrusion, but given the significant financial implications of marriage in my family, due diligence is standard practice. Her directness was refreshing after days of manipulation and guilt trips from my parents and brother. Emma wasn't pretending this was a friendly social call or trying to ease into difficult topics with small talk and pleasantries. What did your investigator find out? Enough to make me very concerned about the foundation of honesty in my relationship with Jake. I'd like to meet with you in person to discuss what I've learned if you're willing. I looked around at the mountain scenery surrounding me, the vast wilderness that had become my sanctuary from exactly this kind of family complication. I'm actually in Colorado, Emma. I moved here 10 months ago. I know, my investigator was very thorough. I'm calling because I'm currently in Denver on business, and I was hoping we could have coffee this afternoon before I fly back to Connecticut tonight. The timing felt too coincidental to be accidental. Business in Denver or investigator business. Emma's laugh was genuine, not the practiced social laugh I'd expected from someone raised in old money circles. "You're perceptive. Let's call it investigator business. I needed to see for myself how thoroughly Jake's family had erased you from their narrative." "And what conclusion did you reach?" "That your family's version of events doesn't match the documented facts, and that you might be the only person involved in this situation who's been telling the truth." We agreed to meet at a coffee shop in downtown Denver called Stella's Coffee House, a place I'd discovered during my first weeks in Colorado when I'd been desperate for human connection and the comfort of familiar caffeine. Emma said she'd be easy to spot wearing a navy blazer and probably looking like she'd stepped out of a prep school catalog. She was right about being easy to spot, but wrong about the prep school impression. When I walked into Stella's 2 hours later, I immediately recognized her from the photos on my family's social media. But in person, she had a warmth and intelligence that hadn't come across in their carefully staged images. She was beautiful in the understated way of someone who'd never needed to try hard for attention, with shoulder-length brown hair, and the kind of classic features that aged well across generations. Mona. She stood up from a corner table where she'd been working on a laptop, extending her hand with a firm handshake that suggested she was accustomed to being taken seriously in rooms full of powerful people. "Thank you for meeting me on such short notice. I have to admit, I'm curious about what your investigator found that brought you all the way to Denver." Emma gestured for me to sit down across from her where she'd already ordered me a coffee based on what she'd somehow learned about my preferences. "Before we get into that, I want you to know that I love your brother. I'm not here to ambush him or destroy our relationship. I'm here because I believe that a marriage built on lies and omissions is doomed to fail, and I'd rather face difficult truths now than discover them after we're legally and financially entangled." Her candor was disarming. I'd expected manipulation or judgment, not someone who seemed genuinely committed to making informed decisions about her future. "Jake told me you don't know about your family's trust fund conditions." "I know about them now. I found out yesterday when I confronted my parents about the gaps in Jake's family's story that my investigator uncovered." Emma pulled out a thick folder from her briefcase, the kind of detailed report that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. "They thought they were protecting me from information that might influence my decision about marriage. I explained that I prefer to make my own informed choices." "What did the investigator find?" Emma opened the folder and spread several documents across the table between us. "Financial records showing systematic theft from your educational fund by your parents, documentation of your move to Colorado 10 months ago, including your new address, employment information, and evidence that you've built a successful life here, social media analysis proving that your family has actively excluded you from events and celebrations while presenting themselves as a complete happy family unit." "And what did my parents tell you when you confronted them with this information?" "They claimed you'd run away after a minor disagreement about money, that you were holding grudges over ancient history, and that you'd always been the difficult child who caused drama and refused to compromise for the good of the family." Emma's expression was neutral, but something in her tone suggested she hadn't found their explanations convincing. "They said you were probably bitter about Jake's success and trying to sabotage his happiness out of jealousy." I felt heat rising in my cheeks, the familiar shame of being misrepresented by people who were supposed to love and protect me. "And what did Jake tell you?" "Nothing. That's the problem." Emma leaned back in her chair, studying my face carefully. "When I asked him directly about your absence from family events and your current living situation, he claimed he didn't know where you were or why you'd left. He said you'd always been independent and that family communication had never been your strong point." "So he lied to you?" "He lied to me about something significant that affects how I understand his character, his family dynamics, and his ability to handle difficult situations with integrity." I wrapped my hands around my coffee mug, using the warmth to ground myself in the present moment rather than getting lost in anger about my family's latest betrayals. "What do you want from me, Emma?" I want the truth, all of it. I want to understand what really happened with your family and why everyone seems to have a different version of events. And I want to know whether you think Jake is capable of the kind of honest, mature relationship that I need in a marriage partner. For the next hour, I told Emma everything. The theft of my educational fund, the systematic gaslighting when I'd tried to address it, Jake's complicity in accepting money he knew belonged to me, my decision to move to Colorado rather than destroy the family through criminal charges, and the devastating realization that my absence had gone completely unnoticed for 10 months. Emma listened without interrupting, taking notes in a leather portfolio and occasionally asking clarifying questions that showed she understood both the legal and emotional implications of what I was describing. "You had grounds for criminal charges," she said when I finished. "Financial abuse of an elderly person, theft, fraud. Why didn't you pursue them?" "Because I wanted my freedom more than I wanted justice. Fighting them would have meant years of legal battles and family therapy sessions where I'd be blamed for destroying the family. I thought if I just disappeared, they'd eventually realize what they'd lost and maybe make an effort to repair the damage. But they didn't. No, they didn't. They just moved on, like I'd never existed in the first place." Emma closed her portfolio and looked directly at me with an intensity that reminded me of a lawyer building a case. "Mona, I need to ask you something, and I want you to answer honestly, even if you think it might hurt Jake's chances with me." "Okay. Do you think he's genuinely changed? Do you think the man I've fallen in love with is who he really is, or is he performing a version of himself that he thinks will win my approval?" The question hit me harder than I'd expected. I thought about Jake's phone call, his tears, his acknowledgement that he'd been selfish and cowardly. I thought about the money he'd set aside to try to make amends, the vulnerability he'd shown when talking about his fear of losing Emma. "I think he's capable of being the man you fell in love with," I said finally. "But I also think he's never been forced to choose between his comfort and his integrity before. Every difficult situation in his life has been smoothed over by money or manipulation or other people making sacrifices, so he doesn't have to face consequences. And you think marrying into my family would be more of the same, more comfort, more protection from real-world consequences. I think it depends on what you and your family require from him. If you're willing to accept the version of Jake who lies to avoid difficult conversations and benefits from other people's suffering without question, then yes, he'll probably continue being that person. But if you demand honesty and accountability and genuine growth, he might surprise you." Emma was quiet for several minutes, staring out the coffee shop window at the Denver skyline with an expression I couldn't read. "He called me this morning," she said eventually, "after I told him about meeting you today. He wanted to explain himself to convince me that whatever you told me shouldn't change how I feel about our relationship." "And what did you tell him?" "I told him that his first instinct being to manage my reaction rather than take responsibility for his actions told me everything I needed to know about his character." Emma gathered her papers back into the folder, her movements precise and controlled. "I told him the wedding was postponed indefinitely while I decide whether he's the kind of person I want to build a life with." "How did he take that about as well as you'd expect from someone who's never been held accountable for his choices before?" Emma's smile was sad, but not unkind. "He's been calling and texting for hours, alternating between apologies and threats to tell my parents that I'm being manipulated by his unstable sister." "I'm sorry. I never wanted to be the reason his relationship fell apart." "You're not the reason, Mona. His choices are the reason. His inability to tell me the truth is the reason. His willingness to build our future on a foundation of lies and omissions is the reason." Emma stood up and extended her hand again, but this time it felt like the beginning of something rather than the end. "I want you to know that regardless of what happens with Jake, I'm grateful to have met you. Your strength and integrity in handling an impossible situation is exactly the kind of character I value in the people I choose to have in my life. What will you do now?" I'm going home to Connecticut to think, and Jake is going to have to decide whether he loves me enough to tell the truth and face whatever consequences that brings, or whether he'd rather lose me than risk his comfortable position in a family that values appearance over authenticity. As Emma walked out of the coffee shop, I realized that she'd given Jake something no one in our family ever had: a real choice between growth and comfort, between truth and convenience, between becoming the person he claimed to be and remaining the person he'd always been. For the first time since this whole wedding crisis began, I felt hopeful that something good might come from all the chaos. Not necessarily Jake's marriage to Emma, but maybe his evolution into someone worthy of genuine love rather than conditional acceptance. After Emma left, I continued my drive to Pine Ridge, my mind spinning with everything that had happened in the last 24 hours. By the time I reached the address Linda had given me for Grandma Rose's property, the afternoon sun was casting long shadows through towering pine trees that lined a gravel driveway I'd never imagined could belong to me. The cabin was everything Grandma Rose's letter had promised, and more. Built from honey-colored logs with green metal roofing, it looked like something from a magazine about mountain living, complete with the wraparound porch she'd mentioned, and views of the Continental Divide that took my breath away. Wind chimes hung from the porch corners, their gentle music mixing with the sound of aspen leaves rustling in the breeze. Linda was waiting for me with a set of keys and a smile that suggested she'd been looking forward to this moment as much as I had. "Your grandmother was so excited about this place," she told me as we walked up the front steps together. "She drove up here every few months to check on the progress and make sure every detail was exactly right. She said it needed to feel like home for someone who'd been carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders." The inside of the cabin was even more perfect than the outside. The main room featured a stone fireplace surrounded by built-in bookshelves, hardwood floors covered with colorful rugs, and windows on 3 sides that brought the forest inside. The kitchen was small but well appointed with granite counters and appliances that looked like they'd never been used. 2 bedrooms shared a bathroom with a clawfoot tub that faced another window overlooking the mountains. "She furnished it herself," Linda explained, running her hand along a dining table that looked handcrafted from local wood. "She wanted everything to be ready for whenever you needed it. She said you'd been taking care of everyone else your whole life, and it was time someone took care of you." I walked onto the back porch where 2 rocking chairs sat facing west toward the peaks that were starting to turn pink in the late afternoon light. A small table between them held a thermos that Linda explained was kept stocked with tea, according to Grandma Rose's specific instructions. "She also left this for you," Linda said, handing me another envelope that had been waiting in the kitchen, "with instructions that you should read it here in this place after you'd had time to see what she built for you." I opened the envelope with hands that were still shaking from the emotional overload of the day. "My dearest Mona." This second letter began, "If you're reading this, you're sitting in the place I created specifically for your healing and happiness. I hope it feels like the refuge I intended it to be. I want you to know that this cabin isn't just a gift. It's a statement of faith in your ability to build a life that brings you joy rather than obligation. I've watched you sacrifice your own needs for others for far too long, and I wanted to create a space where your needs come first. Use this place however feels right to you. Live here full-time or keep it as a weekend retreat. Rent it out if you need the income or leave it empty if you need the solitude. Transform it completely or keep it exactly as I've left it. The only requirement is that you make choices based on what feels authentic to your spirit rather than what you think you owe to other people. I love you beyond measure, and I'm proud of the woman you've become despite the obstacles placed in your path. Your grandmother always." I sat in one of the rocking chairs and let myself cry for the first time since this whole crisis began. Not the angry tears I'd shed over my family's betrayal, but grateful tears for a love that had reached across death to protect and provide for me in ways I'd never imagined possible. My phone buzzed with a text from Austin. "Hey, beautiful. How did the mysterious appointment go? I'm making dinner at my place tonight if you want to come over and tell me about it." I called him instead of texting back, suddenly desperate to hear his voice and share this incredible development with someone who would understand its significance. "Austin, you're not going to believe what just happened to me today." "Try me. I'm pretty good at believing impossible things, especially when they involve you." I told him about Emma's visit, about the cabin, about Grandma Rose's letters, and the financial security I'd never known I had. Austin listened with the kind of attention that reminded me why I'd fallen in love with him, asking thoughtful questions and celebrating each revelation like it was happening to him personally. "So you're basically financially independent now," he said when I finished. "That must feel incredible after everything your family put you through." "It does, but it's more than that. It's like Grandma Rose saw a future I couldn't even imagine for myself and built a bridge to get me there. She understood that sometimes the greatest gift isn't money, it's options." Speaking of options, I have some news that might interest you, especially given everything that's happening with your family situation. I leaned back in the rocking chair, watching the first stars appear in the darkening sky above the mountains. "What kind of news?" "Remember I mentioned that my sister Sarah is a forensic accountant? Well, I told her about your family's theft situation, and she's been doing some research in her spare time. She thinks you might have a stronger legal case than you realized." "Austin, I appreciate the thought, but I've moved on from all that. I don't want to spend the next few years of my life fighting with people who clearly don't value my presence anyway." I understand that completely, and Sarah does too. But here's the thing, she discovered that the statute of limitations for elder financial abuse in Ohio is longer than you probably know, especially when there's ongoing concealment of the crime. Your parents have been actively hiding what they did, which extends the time limit for prosecution. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying you have options that don't necessarily require you to be the one driving the prosecution. Sarah knows people in the Ohio Attorney General's office who handle exactly these kinds of cases. If she provided them with documentation of the theft, they could pursue criminal charges independently of your involvement." The idea of my parents facing legal consequences without me having to orchestrate or participate in their prosecution was appealing in a way I hadn't expected. But wouldn't I still have to testify, be involved in court proceedings, deal with all the family drama that would create? Not necessarily. Elder financial abuse cases often proceed based on documentary evidence and expert testimony. Your grandmother's bank statements, the forged signatures, the pattern of unauthorized withdrawals, that's all evidence that speaks for itself. I thought about Jake's confession that he'd known the theft was happening, about my parents' threats to use Grandma Rose's inheritance as leverage to control my behavior, about the way they'd painted me as the villain when I was actually the victim. Would Sarah really be willing to help with something like this? She doesn't even know me. That's the other thing I wanted to tell you. My family has been following your story because they care about me and they're outraged on your behalf. My mom, who's a retired family court judge, called what your parents did textbook financial abuse and said she'd be happy to provide expert consultation if needed. My dad, who's a social worker, said he's seen too many families destroy themselves protecting abusers at the expense of victims. Your whole family knows about my situation. Only because I was so worried about how the family pressure was affecting you. They all volunteered to help before I even asked. That's what people who care about you do, Mona. They show up when you're facing something difficult. I walked to the edge of the porch, looking up at stars that were invisible from the light pollution of Denver, but blazed clearly in the mountain darkness. This is what real family support looks like, isn't it? People offering help without expecting anything in return, without making me feel guilty for needing assistance. Exactly. And Mona, I want you to know that whatever you decide about the legal situation, about Jake's wedding, about your relationship with your family going forward, I'm here. My family is here. We're not going anywhere, and we're not changing our support based on your choices. Even if I decide to pursue charges against my parents, even if that creates a huge mess and makes me look vindictive or money hungry, especially then, Holding people accountable for financial abuse isn't vindictive, it's justice. And anyone who can't see the difference isn't someone whose opinion matters anyway. After we hung up, I sat on the porch of my grandmother's cabin and tried to process everything that had shifted in my understanding over the past 2 days. I'd started this week feeling isolated and powerless, caught between my family's manipulation and my own desire for peace. Now I had financial independence, legal options, and a support system that offered help without strings attached. But more than that, I had clarity about what kind of life I wanted to build going forward. Not one based on avoiding conflict or keeping other people comfortable, but one based on authenticity, justice, and relationships with people who valued my well-being as much as I valued theirs. For the first time in my adult life, I felt truly free to make choices based on my own values rather than other people's expectations. And that freedom felt more valuable than any inheritance my family could threaten to withhold. The next morning, I woke up in Grandma Rose's cabin feeling more rested than I had in weeks. I decided to spend the night there testing out the bedroom that had been prepared for me with soft linens and a down comforter that felt like sleeping on a cloud. The sunrise through the bedroom window painted the mountains in shades of rose and gold that made me understand why my grandmother had chosen this particular view for my mornings. I was making coffee in the perfectly appointed kitchen when my phone started buzzing with notifications, text messages, missed calls, social media alerts, more activity than my phone usually saw in an entire week. The first text was from Austin. Check TikTok. Riley's video about toxic families went viral and your story is trending. Call me when you see it. Riley was one of our hiking group friends, a social media influencer who used her platform to talk about mental health, toxic relationships, and healing from family trauma. She had about 50,000 followers who appreciated her honesty about difficult topics that most people preferred to keep private. I opened TikTok with growing dread, imagining my personal family drama being dissected by strangers on the internet. But when I found Riley's video, I realized she'd done something brilliant and respectful. She hadn't mentioned my name or any identifying details. Instead, she'd created a video titled, "When Your Family Erases You, Then Demands You Perform for Them," that used my situation as a launching point for discussing a common pattern in dysfunctional families. "I have a friend," Riley said to the camera, her voice gentle but firm, who moved across the country to escape family members who were stealing from her. For 10 months, not one person in her family noticed she was gone. No phone calls asking where she was. No messages checking if she was okay. No questions about why she missed family gatherings. The video showed Riley hiking on a trail I recognized speaking directly to her audience, with the kind of authenticity that had made her popular in the first place. Then her brother decided to get married, and suddenly her family called demanding she come home to play the perfect daughter for the wedding photos. When she said no, they threatened to disinherit her and accused her of being selfish and vengeful. Riley paused to take a sip of water, letting the weight of the situation sink in for her viewers. Here's what I want everyone watching this to understand: families that truly love you don't ignore your existence until they need something from you. People who care about your well-being don't steal your money and then gaslight you about it. Real family doesn't threaten to cut you off financially because you won't perform happiness for their benefit. The video continued with Riley discussing the broader patterns of toxic family dynamics, the way abusive relatives often recruit other family members to pressure victims into compliance, and the importance of choosing your own well-being over family expectations that require you to be less than who you really are. If you're in a situation like my friends, Riley concluded, please know that you deserve better. You deserve people in your life who notice when you're gone, who celebrate your achievements, who support your growth instead of demanding you shrink yourself to make them comfortable. Family is supposed to be a soft place to land, not a performance you have to maintain. The video had been posted 18 hours ago and already had over 2 million views. The comment section was filled with people sharing their own stories of family members who ignored them until they needed something, parents who stole from their children's siblings who enabled abuse to protect their own positions. But it was the Ohio-specific comments that made my stomach drop. This sounds like it happened in Ohio. My cousin's family has a similar situation. Wait, is this about the Miller family? I heard drama about them at church last week. OMG, I think I know who this is. The family with the son getting married to that rich girl. I wondered why the daughter wasn't at any of the pre-wedding events. If this is about Jake Miller, his family is even worse than people realize. My mom works at the bank and said there were some serious financial irregularities with their accounts. I kept scrolling, watching in real time as people in my hometown connected the dots and began sharing information I'd never known was public knowledge. Apparently, word of my parents' financial improprieties had been circulating in their social circles for months, and Riley's video had given people permission to discuss what they'd only whispered about before. My phone rang and Dad's name appeared on the screen with a fury that seemed to vibrate through the device itself. "What the hell did you do?" he shouted without any greeting. "People are calling us asking questions about money and theft and God knows what else. Your mother is getting dropped from her book club and her volunteer committees. I had 3 people at work ask me about criminal charges. Dad, I didn't post anything on social media. I didn't even know about the video until this morning." "Don't lie to me, Mona. This has your fingerprints all over it. You've always been vindictive when you don't get your way, and now you're trying to destroy this family's reputation because we won't enable your selfishness." I walked out onto the cabin's porch where the morning air was crisp and clean and free from the toxic energy radiating through my phone. "Dad, you destroyed your own reputation when you stole money from your daughter and then threatened her for not covering up your crimes. I didn't make you do those things, and I'm not responsible for the consequences when other people find out about them. No one stole anything from you. We used family money to help the family, and if you can't understand that, then you're more selfish than I thought. Family money that Grandma Rose specifically designated for my education. Money you took without my knowledge or consent by forging my signature on bank documents. That's not family financial management, Dad. That's theft. Your grandmother is dead, Mona. She doesn't get to control how we handle family finances from the grave. We made the best decisions we could with the information we had at the time. Actually, she does get to control it. That's how wills and trusts work. That's how the legal system protects people from exactly what you did to me." Dad was quiet for a moment, and I could practically hear him recalculating his approach. "Look, this has gotten out of hand. Your mother and I are willing to forgive your dramatic exit from the family and your public embarrassment of us, but only if you come home immediately and help us fix this mess. We'll tell everyone that the video was based on misunderstandings and family miscommunications, that we've worked everything out, and that you're excited to celebrate Jake's wedding. And if I don't, then you're choosing to be an enemy of this family instead of a member of it. And enemies don't inherit family assets or get invited to family events or have any claim to family support when life gets difficult." I thought about Grandma Rose's cabin surrounding me with its protection and love, about Austin's family offering legal help without expecting anything in return, about Emma's respect for my honesty, even when it complicated her own life. "Dad, I stopped being a member of your family 10 months ago when you failed to notice I was gone. I stopped needing your inheritance when Grandma Rose made sure I'd be financially secure without your approval. And I stopped caring about your threats when I realized that the worst thing you could do to me, cutting me off from people who don't actually love me, would actually be a gift. You're making a mistake, Mona. Family is all you have in this world. When your Colorado friends get tired of your drama and your boyfriend realizes what kind of person you really are, we're the only people who will still be here for you." I looked out at the mountains that had become my home, thinking about the community I'd built with people who celebrated my existence rather than tolerating it. "No, Dad, family is all you have. I have something better. I have people who choose to love me every day, who support my growth instead of demanding my compliance, who show up consistently instead of only when they need something from me. Don't call us when your perfect new life falls apart. Dad said, his voice cold with finality. Don't come crawling back when you realize that blood family is the only relationship that lasts forever. I won't, I promised. Because my perfect new life is built on foundations you never taught me to value honesty, authenticity, and relationships based on mutual respect instead of fear and obligation. After he hung up, I sat in Grandma Rose's rocking chair and watched Riley's video climb toward 3 million views. The comments continued pouring in from people who recognized the patterns she'd described, who shared their own stories of family members who demanded performance instead of offering love. But scattered among the supportive comments were messages that made me realize the viral video was having consequences I hadn't anticipated. I live in Jake Miller's neighborhood, and there are reporters outside their house. Emma Richardson's family just released a statement saying the wedding has been called off indefinitely. Someone started a GoFundMe for the friend in the story if anyone knows how to get the money to her. My phone buzzed with a text from Emma. I hope you're okay. Things got complicated quickly after our coffee yesterday. I wanted you to know that my decision about Jake was already made before any of this became public. Call me if you need anything. Another text from Austin. I'm on my way to you. Riley feels terrible about how big this got, but she stands by everything she said. We all do. And finally, a text from a number I didn't recognize. This is Jake. Emma showed me Riley's video. I know you didn't ask for any of this, and I'm sorry it exploded like it did. But I wanted to thank you for finally forcing me to tell the truth. It's scary as hell, but it feels better than lying. I closed my eyes and listened to the wind chimes on the porch, their gentle music mixing with the sound of pine needles rustling in the mountain breeze. I hadn't set out to destroy my family's reputation, or ruin Jake's wedding, or create viral social media content about our dysfunction. But I also hadn't set out to protect them from the consequences of their choices at the expense of my own well-being. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for people who are determined to harm themselves is to stop enabling their behavior and let them face the natural results of their actions. Even if those results include the entire world finding out who they really are when no one is watching. 3 days after Riley's video reached 5 million views and sparked a nationwide conversation about family financial abuse, I was sitting in my Denver office when Sarah Austin's sister called with news that would change everything. The Ohio Attorney General's office wants to move forward, she said without preamble. Sarah had inherited the family trait of cutting straight to important information without wasting time on pleasantries. I sent them the documentation we compiled, and they're calling it one of the clearest cases of elder financial abuse they've seen in years. I swiveled my chair to face the window where the downtown Denver skyline stretched toward mountains that still took my breath away after nearly a year of calling this place home. What does that mean, exactly? It means they're filing criminal charges against your parents next week. Theft, fraud, elder financial abuse, and forgery. The charges carry potential jail time and mandatory asset forfeiture to pay restitution to victims. My hands started shaking as the full implications hit me. Criminal charges, as in they could actually go to prison. Your father could face up to 5 years, your mother up to 3, depending on their level of involvement and cooperation with the investigation. The state treats financial abuse of elderly victims very seriously, especially when there's evidence of systematic theft over an extended period. I thought about Grandma Rose, how she'd worked her entire life to build the nest egg that was supposed to secure her grandchildren's futures, how she'd trusted her own son to protect her legacy, and had that trust systematically violated for over a decade. What about Jake? He accepted money he knew was stolen from me. That's trickier because he was a beneficiary rather than a perpetrator, but the prosecutor is considering charges for receiving stolen property, especially given his knowledge of the theft. A lot will depend on whether he cooperates with the investigation or tries to protect your parents. When will they be served with the papers? Tomorrow morning. The timing isn't coincidental. The prosecutor wanted to move quickly while the case has public attention and before your parents have time to hide or transfer any remaining assets. Sarah paused, and I could hear papers shuffling in the background of what I imagined was a conference room filled with legal documents and coffee cups. Mona, there's something else you should know. The viral video and the media attention it generated prompted other people to come forward with information about your parents' financial behavior. Apparently, this wasn't an isolated incident. What do you mean? 3 other families in your hometown have contacted the Attorney General's office with concerns about financial irregularities involving your parents. Your father handled estate planning for elderly clients in his insurance business, and there are allegations that he may have manipulated vulnerable seniors into changing their beneficiaries or making financial decisions that primarily benefited him. The scope of potential victims made my stomach turn. I'd thought our family's dysfunction was an isolated tragedy, but it was starting to look like a pattern of behavior that had harmed multiple families over many years. How many people are we talking about? At least 6 elderly clients whose families suspect financial manipulation. The state is opening a comprehensive investigation into your father's business practices going back 15 years. If the allegations are substantiated, we're looking at federal charges for wire fraud and racketeering. I walked to my office kitchen and poured myself a glass of water with hands that were still trembling. The Evergreen Outdoor Gear office was quiet in the late afternoon, most of my colleagues having left early for weekend camping trips or family dinners that didn't involve criminal investigations and viral social media scandals. Sarah, I need you to understand something. I never wanted this to become a criminal case. I just wanted my family to acknowledge what they'd done and maybe make some effort to repair the damage. I know, and the prosecutor knows that too, but financial abuse cases often reveal patterns that go far beyond the original complaint. Your situation was the tip of the iceberg, and now that people are paying attention, other victims feel safe coming forward. What happens next? The papers get served tomorrow, arraignments happen within 48 hours, and then the legal process begins. You'll likely be called as a witness, but the state's case is strong enough that your testimony won't make or break their prosecution. And what about the civil side? Will I be able to recover the money they stole? The criminal conviction will make the civil case much easier, but honestly, between the restitution ordered by the criminal court and the asset forfeiture, you'll probably recover most, if not all, of what was stolen, plus damages and interest. After Sarah hung up, I sat in my office as the sun set behind the mountains, trying to process the fact that my decision to move to Colorado and build an authentic life had inadvertently triggered a criminal investigation that could send my parents to prison and expose years of financial crimes against vulnerable elderly people. Part of me felt vindicated. Finally, there would be consequences for the theft and manipulation that had driven me across the country to escape. Finally, Grandma Rose's money would be returned to its rightful purpose, and other families would be protected from the kind of financial abuse that had torn mine apart. But another part of me felt overwhelming sadness for what our family could have been if my parents had chosen love over control, honesty over manipulation, generosity over greed. My phone buzzed with a text from Austin. "How are you holding up? I know today was heavy. Want to drive up to the cabin and make dinner together?" I looked around my office where the walls were covered with photos from successful marketing campaigns and adventures with my Colorado chosen family. Evidence of a life built on authenticity and surrounded by people who valued my well-being as much as their own. "Yes," I texted back. "I want to go home." Home. Not the house in Ohio where I'd spent 28 years trying to earn love through performance and compliance, but the cabin in the mountains where my grandmother's spirit lived on in every carefully chosen detail designed for my healing and happiness. Tomorrow, my parents would be served with papers that would change their lives forever. Tonight, I was going home to the family I'd chosen and the life I'd built from the ashes of the one they'd tried to destroy. I was chopping vegetables for dinner in Grandma Rose's cabin kitchen when Emma called, her voice tight with a strain I hadn't heard during our coffee meeting in Denver. "I wanted you to hear this from me before it hits the news," she said without preamble. "I've called off the wedding permanently." I set down my knife and walked to the kitchen window where the evening light was painting the mountains in shades of purple and gold. "How are you holding up?" "Better than I expected, actually. Relieved, if I'm being honest." Emma's laugh had a brittle edge, but underneath it, I heard something that sounded like freedom. "Jake came clean about everything after the criminal charges were filed this morning. The theft, his knowledge of it, the way your family has treated you, the lies he told me to protect his image. All of it." "And how did you feel about finally hearing the truth?" "Like I'd been dating a stranger for the last 2 years. The man I fell in love with was supposed to be someone who valued integrity and family loyalty. Finding out that he'd watched his parents steal from his sister and never said anything, that he'd lied to my face about your relationship, that he'd been perfectly willing to build our marriage on a foundation of deception. It changed everything." I heard Austin's car in the driveway and waved to him through the window, gesturing that I was on an important call. He nodded and began unloading grocery bags from his trunk, moving with the easy competence that had first attracted me to him during that trail cleanup event that felt like a lifetime ago. "What was his reaction when you told him the wedding was off?" "He went through all the stages of grief in about 20 minutes. Denial that the charges were serious, anger that I was choosing your side over his bargaining about how we could work through this together, depression, about losing me and the financial security my family represented, and finally acceptance that he'd destroyed our relationship through his own choices." "I'm sorry, Emma. I know you loved him." "I loved who I thought he was, but the person I thought he was wouldn't have stood by while his parents stole from his sister. The person I thought he was would have told me the truth about his family situation instead of lying to protect himself. The person I thought he was would have prioritized justice and integrity over comfort and convenience." Emma paused, and I could hear voices in the background suggesting she was at her family's Connecticut estate, where multiple generations probably lived in separate wings of a house large enough to accommodate entire extended families. "My parents are relieved, honestly. They never said anything directly, but I could tell they had concerns about Jake's background and character. The criminal charges just confirmed what their instincts had been telling them all along." "And how do you feel about that?" "Grateful. Not for the way things ended, but for learning who Jake really was before we were legally bound together. My grandmother always said that crisis reveals character, and Jake's response to this crisis showed me exactly what kind of husband and father he would have been." Austin walked through the front door carrying grocery bags and a bottle of wine, moving quietly through the cabin while I continued my conversation. I told him about Emma the night before, how impressed I'd been with her directness and integrity, how sad I felt that someone so genuine had gotten caught up in our family's web of dysfunction. "Emma, can I ask you something personal?" "Of course." "What are you going to do now? I mean, you've probably spent months planning this wedding, organizing your life around marrying Jake, maybe making career decisions based on being part of a couple." "Actually, that's part of why I'm calling. I've made some decisions that I wanted to share with you, partly because they involve you indirectly." I walked out onto the back porch where the rocking chairs faced the Continental Divide, and wind chimes provided a gentle soundtrack to conversations that mattered. "What kind of decisions?" "I'm starting a foundation focused on financial abuse prevention and victim support. The response to Riley's video and your family's situation showed me how common this problem is and how few resources exist to help people who are being victimized by their own family members." The idea was so unexpected and so perfect that I felt tears welling up in my eyes. "Emma, that's incredible." "I want to fund legal aid for victims who can't afford to pursue justice, create educational resources to help elderly people protect themselves from financial manipulation, and establish support networks for family members who've been cut off or threatened for refusing to enable abuse." "And you want to do all this because of what happened to me?" "I want to do this because of what's happening to thousands of people like you every day. Your situation isn't unique, Mona. It's just the one that happened to intersect with my life and wake me up to how widespread this problem really is." Austin appeared on the porch with 2 glasses of wine and a smile that suggested he'd been listening to enough of the conversation to understand its significance. He handed me a glass and settled into the other rocking chair content to share the evening without demanding to be the center of my attention. What would something like that involve exactly? Legal advocacy, financial counseling, family mediation services, educational workshops, and emergency assistance for people who need to escape abusive family situations quickly. I'm thinking of it as a comprehensive support system for anyone dealing with family financial abuse. That sounds amazing, but also like a massive undertaking. It is, which is why I wanted to ask if you'd consider being involved. Not full-time necessarily, but as an advisor or spokesperson or whatever level of participation feels right to you. I nearly dropped my wine glass. Me, Emma, I'm not qualified to run a nonprofit or provide financial counseling. I'm a marketing coordinator for an outdoor gear company. You're a survivor who rebuilt her life after financial abuse and family manipulation. You're someone who chose integrity over comfort, authenticity over convenience. You understand what victims need because you've been where they are. I don't know what to say. Say you'll think about it. The foundation is going to happen regardless, but having your perspective and your story as part of it would make everything we do more genuine and more effective. After Emma hung up, I sat with Austin on the porch and watched the first stars appear in the mountain sky while I processed everything that had happened in the last week. My family's theft had led to criminal charges that revealed a pattern of financial abuse affecting multiple families. Jake's lies had cost him his relationship with a remarkable woman who was now channeling her disappointment into something that could help countless other victims. "What are you thinking?" Austin asked, reaching over to take my hand in his. "I'm thinking about how strange life is. A year ago, I was working 3 jobs and living in a studio apartment that smelled like cat litter, desperately trying to earn love from people who saw me as an obstacle to their happiness. Now I'm sitting in a cabin my grandmother bought for me, talking to a woman who wants to partner with me to help other families avoid the kind of trauma mine put me through. And how does that feel? Like maybe everything I went through was worth it if it leads to something that helps other people. Like maybe the worst thing that happened to me could become the foundation for the best thing I do with my life." Austin squeezed my hand, his thumb tracing circles on my palm in the gesture that had become his signature way of offering comfort and connection. "You know what I love about you, Mona. You could have used your grandmother's inheritance to disappear completely to build a life so separate from your family's dysfunction that you never had to think about any of it again. Instead, you're considering using your experience to help other people who are going through the same thing. Is that what I'm doing?" "I think it's exactly what you're doing, and I think your grandmother would be proud." I looked up at the stars that were invisible from the light pollution of Ohio, but blazed clearly in the mountain darkness, each point of light a reminder that even in the vast emptiness of space, there were sources of illumination for anyone willing to look up and find them. Tomorrow, my parents would begin facing the legal consequences of their choices. Tonight, I was sitting with the person I loved most in the place my grandmother had created, specifically for my healing, considering how to transform my worst experiences into something that could bring hope and justice to other families. It wasn't the life I'd imagined for myself a year ago, but it was better than anything I could have dreamed. 2 weeks after the criminal charges were filed, I was hiking with my Saturday morning group when my phone rang with a call from Aunt Carol, my mother's sister, who I hadn't spoken to since leaving Ohio. The hiking trail was too steep for conversation, so I let it go to voicemail and continued climbing toward the summit of Mount Bierstadt with friends who celebrated every switchback and shared trail mix without keeping score of who contributed what. It wasn't until we reached the 14,000-foot peak, where the entire front range stretched out below us like a map of my new life's possibilities, that I remembered to check the message. "Mona, honey, it's Aunt Carol. I know you and your parents haven't been speaking, but I thought you should know what's happening here. Your mother called me crying this morning, and honestly, I've never heard her sound so broken. The whole family is falling apart, and I think they're finally understanding what they've lost. Please call me back when you get this. I think there are things you need to know." I handed my phone to Austin and walked to the edge of the rocky summit where prayer flags left by previous climbers fluttered in the thin mountain air. Below us, the world looked manageable, orderly, like problems that seemed insurmountable at ground level might actually have solutions when viewed from sufficient distance. "What do you think?" Austin asked after listening to the message. "I think Aunt Carol has always been the family mediator, and she probably feels like it's her responsibility to fix this somehow. Do you want to call her back?" I considered the question while watching clouds cast moving shadows across the valleys below us. Aunt Carol had been kind to me throughout my childhood, the relative who remembered my birthday and asked about my interests, and treated me like an individual, rather than a disappointment or a problem to be managed. "Yeah, I think I do, but not today. Today is for celebrating making it to the top of our third 14er this season." We spent another hour on the summit taking photos and eating the sandwiches we'd carried up the mountain before beginning the long descent that would take us back to the world where family dysfunction and criminal charges and viral social media scandals waited to be addressed. That evening, I called Aunt Carol from the cabin's front porch while Austin prepared dinner, and the mountains settled into their nightly routine of dramatic color changes that never failed to remind me why I'd chosen this life over the one I'd left behind. "Oh, honey, I'm so glad you called back," Aunt Carol said, her voice carrying the exhaustion of someone who'd been managing other people's emotions for weeks. "I didn't know if you'd want to hear from any of us after everything that's happened." "I've always appreciated your kindness, Aunt Carol. You're not responsible for what my parents did." "Well, I'm afraid I haven't been as innocent as you might think. I knew something wasn't right about the way they talked about Grandma Rose's money, but I didn't push for details because I didn't want to get involved in family financial matters." I rocked back in Grandma Rose's chair, surprised by Aunt Carol's admission of complicity through silence. "What did you know exactly?" "I knew that Jake's lifestyle seemed awfully expensive for someone fresh out of college, and I knew that you were working multiple jobs while he traveled and bought new cars and lived in that fancy apartment downtown. I suspected that Grandma Rose's educational fund was being used differently than she intended, but I told myself it wasn't my business. And now I realize that my silence made me part of the problem. I should have asked questions, should have demanded transparency, should have protected you the way Grandma Rose would have wanted me to." Carol's honesty was refreshing after weeks of defensive phone calls from my parents and Jake's attempts to minimize their behavior. Someone in my family was finally taking responsibility for their role in enabling the dysfunction that had driven me away. "What's happening with my parents now?" Carol sighed, and I could practically see her rubbing her temples the way she did when family stress gave her headaches. "Your father lost his insurance license pending the outcome of the criminal investigation. The state insurance commission suspended him as soon as the charges were filed, and his employer terminated his contract immediately. He can't work in insurance or financial services while the case is pending. And Mom, your mother has been dropped from every volunteer organization she belonged to. The library board, the church fundraising committee, the historical society, the garden club. All of them asked for her resignation when the news about the criminal charges spread through town. I tried to feel satisfied by this information, but instead I felt hollow, like watching a building collapse that had been condemned for safety reasons, but still contained memories of better times. What about their finances? They're in free fall. Without your father's income and with legal fees mounting, they had to put the house up for sale. But the market isn't great right now, and potential buyers are scared off by all the media attention. The realtor says it could take months to find someone willing to deal with the notoriety." And Jake lost his job too. His employer decided that having someone under investigation for receiving stolen property wasn't worth the liability. He moved back in with your parents, which has created a whole new set of problems. "What kind of problems?" "Blame. Your father blames Jake for not being grateful enough for the sacrifices they made to support his education. Your mother blames Jake for losing Emma and the financial security she represented. Jake blames your parents for not being honest with him about where the money came from, even though he clearly suspected something was wrong. Carol paused to take a drink of what I suspected was the glass of wine she'd needed to get through this conversation. But mostly they all blame you for refusing to sweep this under the rug and preserve the family image. They can't understand why you chose to let them face consequences instead of protecting them from their own choices. Do they understand that I didn't file the criminal charges, that the state pursued this case independently based on evidence that other people provided? Intellectually, maybe, but emotionally, they've convinced themselves that if you'd just come to the wedding and played along with the happy family charade, none of this would have happened. They see you as the cause of their problems, rather than the victim of their crimes. I walked to the porch railing where hummingbirds were visiting the feeders Austin had hung for my birthday, their wings beating so fast they were just blurs of iridescent color in the fading light. Carol, why are you telling me all this? What do you want me to do with this information? I honestly don't know. Part of me hopes you'll feel sorry for them and find a way to forgive everything they've done. But another part of me thinks they need to face these consequences fully before they'll be capable of real change. And what do you think I should do? I think you should keep living the life you've built in Colorado with people who value and support you. I think you should continue making decisions based on what feels authentic to your spirit rather than what would make your parents more comfortable. And I think you should know that at least one person in this family understands that you were the victim, not the villain in everything that happened. After we hung up, I sat on the porch and processed what Carol had told me. My parents had lost their income, their social standing, their community connections, and their comfortable illusions about themselves. They were facing the natural consequences of decades of financial manipulation and family dysfunction. But instead of using this crisis as an opportunity for self-reflection and growth, they were doubling down on their narrative that I was the problem, that my refusal to enable their behavior was somehow more damaging than the behavior itself. Austin appeared on the porch with 2 plates of the pasta primavera he'd been preparing, settling beside me with the easy presence that had become the foundation of every peaceful evening I'd experienced since moving to Colorado. How are you feeling about everything Carol told you? Sad mostly. Not guilty or responsible, but genuinely sad that people I spent 28 years loving chose comfort over growth, blame over accountability, fantasy over reality. Do you think they'll ever understand what they did wrong? I looked out at the mountains that had taught me about perspective, about the way problems that seemed overwhelming at ground level could appear manageable when viewed from sufficient height and distance. Maybe, but if they do, it will have to come from them choosing to face uncomfortable truths rather than me trying to make them understand things they're not ready to see. And you're okay with that? I'm okay with that. I'm okay with letting them have their consequences without trying to rescue them from choices they made as adults. I'm okay with prioritizing my own healing over their comfort. We ate dinner on the porch as stars appeared in the darkening sky, and for the first time since this whole crisis began, I felt truly at peace with every decision I'd made. My family was learning what it felt like to face the world without the protection of secrets and lies and manipulation. I was learning what it felt like to live without carrying the weight of their dysfunction on my shoulders. Both lessons were long overdue. 3 months after the criminal charges were filed, I was working late in my home office at the cabin when the phone rang. The caller ID showed Dad's name, and for a moment I considered letting it go to voicemail like I had for the previous dozen calls he'd made since the legal proceedings began. But something made me answer, maybe curiosity about what could possibly motivate him to keep trying after months of silence from me. Mona. His voice sounded older, worn down in a way I'd never heard before. I need to talk to you. I saved the marketing proposal I'd been working on for Evergreen Outdoor Gear and walked to the window where snow was falling in the kind of perfect silent flakes that made the mountain forest look like a Christmas card. I'm listening. The prosecutor offered us a plea deal today. Your mother and I plead guilty to the theft charges, pay full restitution, plus penalties, serve 6 months in county jail, and get 5 years probation with community service. If we don't take it, they're going to trial with additional charges that could mean years in federal prison. Okay, that's all you have to say. Your parents are facing jail time and you respond like I just told you the weather forecast. I sat down in the desk chair Austin had bought for me, an ergonomic model that supported the long hours I'd been spending on the foundation work Emma and I had been developing together. What would you like me to say, Dad? I'd like you to say you'll talk to the prosecutor, ask them to drop the charges, tell them that this was all a family misunderstanding that got blown out of proportion. But it wasn't a family misunderstanding. It was systematic theft from your elderly mother and your adult daughter over a period of 12 years. It was family money being used for family purposes. We never intended to hurt anyone, and if you'd just talked to us directly instead of involving lawyers and prosecutors, we could have worked something out privately. I walked to the kitchen and put the kettle on for tea, a nightly ritual that had become one of my favorite parts of living in the cabin. The simple act of making tea in a kitchen designed specifically for my comfort and happiness felt like a daily reminder of how much my life had changed. Dad, I did try to talk to you directly. When I discovered the theft 18 months ago, I came to you with bank statements and documentation, and you gaslit me into thinking I was imagining things. You told me I was being greedy and selfish for questioning your financial decisions. We were protecting the family. Sometimes parents have to make difficult decisions that their children don't understand until they're older. Stealing isn't protecting Dad. Forging my signature on bank documents isn't a parenting decision. Lying to me about where my inheritance went isn't protecting anyone except yourselves. The kettle whistled and I poured hot water over the chamomile tea bags Austin had bought for me after learning that chamomile helped me sleep better during stressful periods. Even in the middle of difficult conversations with my family of origin, I was surrounded by evidence of being truly loved and cared for. Look, I know mistakes were made. I'm willing to admit that maybe we should have been more transparent about our financial decisions. But this punishment doesn't fit the crime, Mona. Your mother is 62 years old. She could die in jail. She could have thought about that before she chose to participate in stealing from her own daughter and mother-in-law. You've changed. The daughter I raised would never be this cold and unforgiving. I laughed not with humor, but with the recognition of a pattern I'd finally learned to see clearly. The daughter you raised was trained to prioritize your comfort over her own well-being. She was taught that love meant accepting mistreatment and calling it family loyalty. She was conditioned to believe that holding people accountable for harmful behavior was somehow more wrong than the harmful behavior itself. And you think the person you've become is better. I know she is. The person I've become has authentic relationships with people who respect her boundaries. She has financial security that doesn't depend on anyone else's approval. She has work that matters to her, and friends who celebrate her existence rather than tolerating it. Those people don't know you the way we do. They only see the version of yourself you choose to show them. You're right. They see the version of me that feels safe being honest, vulnerable, and authentic, because I know they won't punish me for having needs or opinions or boundaries. They see the version of me that exists when I'm not constantly managing other people's emotions or walking on eggshells to avoid triggering family drama. Dad was quiet for a long moment, and I could hear ice clinking in a glass, suggesting he was drinking something stronger than tea to get through this conversation. The family is falling apart without you, Mona. Jake is depressed, your mother cries every day, and I can't seem to fix anything no matter what I do. Dad, the family fell apart long before I left. I was just the only person holding the broken pieces together through sheer force of will and self-sacrifice. When I stopped doing that job, you all had to face what was left underneath. So you're saying we deserve this? We deserve to lose everything because we made some mistakes with money. I'm saying you're experiencing the natural consequences of choices you made as adults. You chose to steal from people who trusted you. You chose to lie when you were caught. You chose to prioritize your own comfort over other people's financial security. And you chose to destroy your family rather than forgive our mistakes and help us rebuild. This was the moment referenced in Riley's viral video and in every conversation I'd had about my family situation over the past few months. The moment where my father tried to make me responsible for saving him from consequences he'd created for himself. Dad, I want you to listen to me very carefully because this is the last conversation we're going to have about this topic. Mona, please don't make any final decisions while you're angry. Family is forever. And someday you're going to need us more than you need whatever principles you think you're protecting. I am family. I said, my voice steady and calm in a way that surprised even me. I'm just not your family anymore. The silence that followed felt different from the pauses earlier in our conversation. It felt like the moment when something fundamental shifts and everyone involved recognizes that there's no going back to the way things were before. What do you mean? I mean that real family doesn't steal from each other and then blame the victim for reporting the theft. Real family doesn't ignore someone's existence for 10 months and then demand their presence when it's convenient. Real family doesn't threaten to cut someone off financially for refusing to cover up crimes. But we're blood relatives, Mona. That has to count for something. It counted for something when I gave you 18 months to acknowledge what you'd done and make things right. It counted for something when I moved across the country instead of filing criminal charges immediately. It counted for something when I tried to have honest conversations with you about how your behavior had affected me. And now I understand that DNA isn't a free pass to treat people badly without consequences. Now I know the difference between family that's based on love and family that's based on obligation and guilt. So that's it. You're just writing us off completely. I'm choosing to invest my time and emotional energy in relationships that are based on mutual respect and authentic care. I'm choosing to surround myself with people who support my growth rather than demanding that I shrink myself to make them comfortable. Dad's breathing was heavy-labored, like someone processing information that required complete recalibration of everything they thought they understood about the world. What am I supposed to tell your mother? What am I supposed to tell Jake? Tell them that actions have consequences even when the actions happen within families. Tell them that love without accountability isn't actually love, it's enablement. Tell them that I'm building a life with people who choose to love me every day, rather than people who see me as an obligation or a burden. And what are we supposed to do without you? The same thing you've been doing for the past 10 months. Figure out how to be a family without using me as the glue that holds your dysfunction together. I hung up the phone and sat in the quiet cabin where the only sounds were the wind through the pine trees and the gentle hum of the heater, keeping me warm through another Colorado winter night. For the first time in my adult life, I had said exactly what I meant to the people who had raised me without softening my message to protect their feelings or preserve relationships that had never actually served my well-being. Austin's headlights swept across the driveway as he arrived home from his weekly basketball game with coworkers carrying the kind of uncomplicated joy that came from spending time with people who simply enjoyed each other's company without hidden agendas or emotional manipulation. "How did it go?" he asked, finding me in the kitchen where I was finishing my tea and looking out at snow that continued falling in the peaceful silence that had become the soundtrack to my healing. It went exactly the way it needed to go. I finally said the thing that froze him completely. Which was, I told him I am family. I'm just not his family anymore. Austin wrapped his arms around me from behind, and I leaned into the embrace of someone who had chosen to love me, not despite my boundaries and standards, but because of them. How does it feel to be done with all of that? Like I can finally breathe all the way down to the bottom of my lungs. Outside, the snow continued falling on the mountains that had taught me about distance and perspective, and the way problems that seemed insurmountable at ground level could become manageable when viewed from sufficient height. Inside, I was home with the person I'd chosen and who had chosen me back in a place built specifically for my happiness by someone who had loved me enough to imagine a future I couldn't even dream for myself. For the first time in my life, I felt completely free to be exactly who I really was. 6 months after my final conversation with Dad, I was sitting in Emma's Connecticut office reviewing foundation materials when she answered a call that would change everything we'd been working toward. That was our legal team, she said, hanging up with a smile that lit up her entire face. The Miller family case has been officially closed. Your parents pled guilty to all charges and have been sentenced to 8 months in county jail plus 3 years probation. Full restitution has been ordered, including damages and interest. I set down the victim support pamphlet I'd been reviewing and tried to process the fact that legal justice had finally been served. How much restitution? $230,000, which covers the original educational fund, theft interest on the stolen amounts, penalties for financial abuse, and compensation for emotional damages. The court ordered them to liquidate assets, to pay immediately rather than allowing payment plans that could drag on for years. And the other victims? Similar restitution orders for the 6 families who came forward, plus criminal penalties for the additional fraud charges. The total damage your father caused over 15 years exceeds $1.2 million. I walked to Emma's office window, which overlooked manicured gardens that had been maintained by the same landscaping company for 3 generations. In the distance, I could see the stable where Emma had learned to ride horses as a child, the tennis court where she'd played with private instructors, the pool house where she'd hosted birthday parties for friends whose trust funds were mentioned in society pages. "How does it feel?" Emma asked, joining me at the window. Honestly, anticlimactic. I thought I'd feel more satisfaction or vindication, but mostly I just feel relieved. Like a chapter of my life is finally closed, and I can put all my energy into writing the next one. Speaking of next chapters, I have news about the foundation that I think you're going to love. Emma had been working with her family's legal team and financial advisors for months to establish the Rose Miller Foundation for Financial Abuse Prevention, named in honor of my grandmother, whose stolen legacy had sparked everything we were now building together. The IRS approval came through yesterday. We're officially a tax-exempt nonprofit organization with an initial endowment of $5 million from my family's trust, plus commitments for another $3 million over the next 2 years from other donors who've been following our work. $8 million for financial abuse prevention. $8 million to start. But here's the really exciting part. We've been contacted by advocacy groups in 12 states who want to partner with us to expand victim services and prevention education. We could be looking at a national network within 5 years. I thought about Grandma Rose, how she'd bought a cabin in Colorado, because I'd mentioned once that I dreamed of living somewhere with clean air and open spaces, how she'd understood that sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is options that don't depend on other people's approval or generosity. There's something poetic about using my family's dysfunction to help other families avoid the same kind of trauma. It's more than poetic, Mona. It's transformative. We're taking the worst thing that happened to you and turning it into the best thing we can do for other people. Emma pulled out a thick folder filled with applications, testimonials, and program proposals that represented months of planning and research. I want to show you something that came in yesterday's mail. It's from a woman in Oregon whose mother-in-law was being financially manipulated by her own son. She saw Riley's viral video, contacted our intake hotline, and we connected her with legal aid that helped her file protective orders and recover stolen funds. The letter was handwritten on stationery that reminded me of the kind Grandma Rose had used for important correspondence, careful script that spoke to the seriousness of what was being shared. "Dear Ms. Richardson and Ms. Miller," it began, "I don't know how to thank you for creating resources that didn't exist when my family needed them most. Because of your foundation, my mother-in-law recovered $80,000 that her son had stolen from her retirement account. And more importantly, she learned that financial abuse isn't something she had to endure alone. This is incredible, Emma. It gets better. She's volunteering with our Oregon partner organization, now providing peer support to other elderly victims of family financial abuse. She's taking her worst experience and using it to help other people avoid the isolation and shame she felt. I read through more letters and emails from people who'd been helped by the resources we'd developed, families who'd been educated about warning signs and protective measures, attorneys who'd received training on financial abuse cases that helped them better serve their clients. How many people have we helped so far? Direct services to over 300 families in 8 states, educational workshops for more than 2,000 people, and legal training for nearly 500 attorneys and social workers. But the ripple effect is probably much larger. Every person we educate becomes someone who can recognize and respond to financial abuse in their own communities. Emma walked to her desk and pulled out a business plan that looked like the kind of comprehensive strategic document her family had probably been creating for successful ventures for generations. I want to offer you something, and I want you to consider it seriously before you respond. What kind of something? I want you to be the foundation's executive director. Full-time competitive salary, comprehensive benefits, and the opportunity to build a national organization from the ground up. I sat down hard in one of Emma's office chairs, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what she was proposing. Emma, I don't have experience running a nonprofit. I don't know anything about organizational management or strategic planning or fundraising, but you know everything about surviving financial abuse and rebuilding your life afterward. You understand what victims need because you've been where they are. You have the marketing and communication skills we need to reach people who don't even realize they're being victimized. And you think that's enough qualification to run an $8 million organization. I think it's the most important qualification. We can hire operational experts and financial managers and program specialists. What we can't hire is someone who authentically understands the experience we're trying to address. Emma pulled out another folder, this one containing salary projections and benefit packages and job descriptions that made my head spin with their complexity and scope. Take your time deciding. Talk it over with Austin. Think about what kind of life you want to build in Colorado. Consider whether this feels like the right next step for your personal healing journey. What would happen to my job at Evergreen Outdoor Gear? That's up to you. You could transition, gradually work part-time for both organizations during a startup period, or make a clean break and dive into foundation work full-time. The beauty of having significant funding is that we can be flexible about how we structure everything. I thought about Tony, my boss at Evergreen, who'd given me the freedom to work on foundation projects during business hours and had publicly supported my advocacy work, about the marketing campaigns that had brought me professional satisfaction and financial security, but had never felt like my true calling. Can I ask you something personal, Emma? Of course. Why is this so important to you? You could do anything with your life support, any cause create any kind of legacy. Why financial abuse prevention? Emma was quiet for a moment, looking out at the gardens where she'd grown up surrounded by every advantage money could buy. Because meeting you taught me that privilege isn't just about having resources. It's about using those resources to protect people who don't have the same options you do. And you think I'm the right person to help you do that. I think you're the only person who can help me do it authentically. Your story, your survival, your commitment to healing, that's what will make this foundation credible to the people who need it most. Emma handed me a business card with my name printed on it in elegant script, Mona Miller, Executive Director, Rose Miller Foundation for Financial Abuse Prevention. I had these made just in case you said yes, but if you say no, I'll understand completely and we'll find another way to work together that fits your life better. I held the card between my fingers, running my thumb over raised letters that spelled out a future I'd never imagined for myself. A future where my family's worst behaviors became the foundation for work that could prevent other families from experiencing similar trauma. I need to talk to Austin about this. Of course, take all the time you need. And I need to think about whether I'm ready to make my personal trauma the centerpiece of my professional identity. That's exactly what you should be thinking about. This work can be healing, but it can also be re-traumatizing if you're not in the right place emotionally. I stood up to leave, tucking the business card into my wallet next to my driver's license and the photo of Austin and me on our first 14er summit. Emma, regardless of what I decide about the executive director position, I want you to know that this conversation, this partnership, this entire foundation, it's given meaning to everything I went through with my family. You've helped me transform my worst experiences into something that can bring hope to other people. You did that, Mona. I just provided the funding and the infrastructure, the vision, the passion, the authentic understanding of what victims need. That all came from you. As I drove home to Colorado through mountain passes that had become as familiar as the Ohio highways of my childhood, I thought about how much had changed in the 18 months since I'd loaded my belongings into a moving truck and fled west to escape family dysfunction that felt inescapable. I'd gained financial independence, authentic relationships, professional recognition, and the kind of peace that comes from living according to your own values rather than other people's expectations. I'd learned the difference between love and obligation, between family and DNA, between forgiveness and enabling. Most importantly, I'd discovered that the worst thing that ever happened to me could become the source of the most meaningful work I might ever do. 1 year later, I stood on the wraparound porch of Grandma Rose's cabin, watching Austin arrange chairs for the small ceremony we'd planned to celebrate both our engagement and the official launch of the Rose Miller Foundation's national expansion. The morning sun painted the continental divide in shades of gold and pink that reminded me exactly why I'd fallen in love with this place and the life I'd built here. "Are you nervous?" Emma asked, joining me with 2 cups of coffee and wearing the kind of genuine smile that had convinced me to trust her friendship from our very first conversation in that Denver coffee shop. About the engagement party or the foundation launch? Both. Either. The fact that your entire life is changing in wonderful ways that would have been unimaginable 2 years ago. I accepted the coffee, gratefully inhaling the familiar aroma that had become part of my morning ritual in this place, designed specifically for my healing and happiness. Honestly, I'm more excited than nervous. Everything feels like it's exactly where it's supposed to be. The foundation had exceeded every goal we'd set for our first year of operation. We'd provided direct services to over 1,000 families across 15 states, trained nearly 3,000 professionals to recognize and respond to financial abuse, and lobbied successfully for stronger elder protection laws in 6 states. The ripple effects of our work were appearing in news stories about prevented scams, families reunited after financial manipulation was exposed, and elderly people empowered to protect themselves from exploitation. But the most meaningful outcome had been the personal transformation I'd experienced through turning my trauma into purpose. Every survivor we helped, every family we educated, every professional we trained became proof that my decision to leave Ohio and build an authentic life had created value far beyond my own healing. "How many people are we expecting today?" I asked, watching Austin test the sound system he'd set up for the ceremony. "About 60 for the engagement celebration, plus the documentary crew that's filming the foundation launch segment. The reporter from the Denver Post should arrive around noon, and the photographer from Colorado Life magazine is coming at 2 for the feature story." My story had become something of a phenomenon in the year since Riley's viral video had sparked national conversations about family financial abuse. Magazine articles, podcast interviews, and speaking engagements had given me platforms to educate people about warning signs and resources, while sharing the message that leaving toxic family relationships was sometimes the most loving choice for everyone involved. "Have you heard anything from Jake lately?" Emma asked, settling into one of the rocking chairs where I'd spent countless evenings processing my family's dysfunction and planning my future beyond it. He called last week, actually. First time in 6 months. Jake had spent the previous year in intensive therapy working with a counselor who specialized in family dysfunction and financial crimes. His willingness to confront his own behavior and take responsibility for his choices had surprised me more than anything else about this entire situation. How's he doing? Better. Different. He's working construction now, paying his own bills for the first time in his adult life, and apparently dating someone who doesn't know anything about our family history. He said he wanted to apologize again for everything that happened, but more importantly, he wanted to thank me. Thank you for what? For refusing to enable his behavior and forcing him to face who he really was. He said losing Emma was the best thing that ever happened to him because it made him realize that he needed to become someone worth loving rather than someone who manipulated others into providing what he needed. Austin appeared on the porch carrying folding chairs and wearing the kind of easy smile that had first attracted me to him during that trail cleanup event that felt like a lifetime ago. The caterer just arrived with enough food to feed an army, he announced, setting down the chairs and wrapping his arms around me from behind. I think Emma might have overestimated how much foundation donors and hiking friends can eat. Better too much than too little, Emma laughed. Plus, we can donate leftovers to the shelter downtown. Everything becomes part of the Foundation's community service mission. I leaned back against Austin's chest and surveyed the scene unfolding around us. Friends from our hiking group hanging lights between the pine trees, Foundation board members setting up information tables about our programs and services, documentary cameras, capturing the kind of authentic celebration that happened when people gathered to honor genuine growth and positive change. Can I tell you both something? I said, my voice thick with emotion I hadn't expected to feel so intensely. Of course, they replied in unison, making me laugh despite the tears that were threatening to spill over. 2 years ago, I was living in a studio apartment that smelled like cat litter, working 3 jobs to pay off student loans for education I'd funded myself, while my family spent my inheritance on luxuries. I felt invisible, unworthy, and convinced that my needs would always be secondary to other people's comfort. I gestured toward the mountain landscape that had become the backdrop for every major milestone in my new life. Today I'm standing in a cabin my grandmother bought specifically for my happiness, engaged to a man who celebrates my boundaries rather than trying to manipulate them. Running a foundation that's helping thousands of families avoid the trauma mine put me through. I have financial security, authentic relationships, meaningful work, and the kind of peace that comes from living according to my own values. And how does that transformation feel? Emma asked ever the social justice attorney, even in personal conversations. Like proof that sometimes losing your family is how you find yourself. Like evidence that the most painful experiences can become the foundation for the most meaningful work. Like confirmation that choosing authenticity over obligation is always worth whatever it costs. Austin turned me around to face him, his hands gentle on my shoulders and his expression serious despite the celebration happening around us. Mona, I need to ask you something important before all the guests arrive and we get caught up in party logistics. What is it? Are you completely certain that this life we're building together is what you want, not just as an escape from your family dysfunction, but as a genuine choice about how you want to spend your future? The question was so thoughtful, so respectful of my healing journey, and so characteristic of the way Austin approached every important decision that I felt tears spilling down my cheeks before I could answer. Austin, you've watched me rebuild my entire identity from the ground up. You've supported me through criminal trials, viral social media scandals, difficult decisions about my family relationships, and the launch of a national nonprofit organization. You've never once asked me to be smaller or quieter or less complicated to make your life easier. Because I don't want a smaller or quieter version of you. I want exactly who you are, including the complications and the strong opinions and the commitment to justice that makes you fight so hard for other families. Then yes, I'm completely certain. This life, this work, this relationship, it's not my escape from who I used to be. It's the fullest expression of who I've always been when I felt safe enough to be authentic. Austin kissed me then in front of Emma and the arriving guests and the documentary cameras, a kiss that tasted like promise and possibility, and the kind of love that supports growth rather than demanding conformity. "Okay, you two," Emma called out. "Save some romance for the actual ceremony. We have a foundation to launch and an engagement to celebrate, and I need both of you focused on the bigger picture." The rest of the day unfolded like something from a dream I'd never dared to have. Friends toasting our engagement with champagne that sparkled in the Mountain Sunlight Foundation, donors sharing stories about families we'd helped, reporters asking thoughtful questions about turning personal trauma into social justice work, and Austin's parents presenting me with a family ring that had belonged to his grandmother. "She would have loved you," Austin's mother told me, clasping the antique gold band around my wrist. "She always said that the best people were the ones who turn their pain into purpose." As the sun set behind the Continental Divide, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that never failed to remind me of why I'd chosen this life over the one my family had offered me in Ohio, I found myself surrounded by the chosen family I'd built from people who valued authenticity over appearance, growth over comfort, justice over convenience. Jake had been right about one thing during our last phone conversation: family was supposed to last forever. But he'd been wrong about which family I belonged to. My real family wasn't determined by DNA or obligation or shared history. My real family was made up of people who chose to love me every day, who supported my healing and growth, who celebrated my successes and offered comfort during my struggles. My real family was gathered around me now, toasting the future I'd built from the ashes of relationships that had demanded I be less than who I really was. As the evening wound down and guests began saying their goodbyes, Emma pulled me aside for a moment of private conversation, away from the cameras and the celebration. "I have something for you," she said, handing me a leather portfolio I recognized as the kind her family used for important legal documents. Inside was a deed to a property I'd never seen before, located in a mountain community, about an hour from the cabin. "It's a retreat center," Emma explained. 15 acres with a main lodge, sleeping cabins for 30 people, and conference facilities designed for workshops and therapeutic programs. I bought it for the foundation, but I want you to know it's also yours personally. A place where you can bring survivors for intensive healing programs, where families can come for education and mediation, where professionals can receive training in beautiful surroundings that support the difficult emotional work we're asking them to do. I stared at the deed, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what Emma was giving, not just to me personally, but to every family who would benefit from having access to resources my own family could never have imagined. "Emma, this is too much. I don't know how to accept something this generous." "Accept it the same way you accepted your grandmother's cabin, as evidence that people who really love you want to create opportunities for your happiness and success, not obstacles to your growth." "But why are you willing to invest so much in me and this work?" Emma smiled, looking out at the mountains that had become the backdrop for both our friendship and our shared mission. "Because you taught me that privilege isn't about what you have. It's about what you do with what you have to protect people who don't have the same advantages. You turned the worst thing that ever happened to you into a gift for thousands of other families. That's the kind of legacy I want to be part of building." Later that night, after all the guests had gone home and Austin had fallen asleep beside me, I sat on the porch of Grandma Rose's cabin and reflected on everything that had changed since I'd answered Dad's phone call about Jake's wedding nearly 2 years ago. I'd lost the family I'd been born into, but I'd gained the family I'd chosen. I'd lost the illusion that DNA guaranteed love, but I'd gained the knowledge that authentic relationships were possible. I'd lost the financial security that came with family approval, but I'd gained independence that didn't depend on anyone else's conditional acceptance. Most importantly, I'd learned that sometimes the greatest gift you can give yourself is the courage to walk away from people who require you to be less than who you really are in order to keep them comfortable. My phone buzzed with a text from Riley, whose viral video had sparked the chain of events that led to this new life. Saw the news coverage of your engagement and foundation launch. So proud of you for turning your pain into purpose and your trauma into triumph. You're proof that leaving toxic family is sometimes the most loving choice for everyone involved. I typed back, "Thank you for giving me a platform to tell my story. You helped me realize I wasn't alone in this experience." "None of us are alone," she responded. "That's the whole point. When we tell our stories honestly, we give other people permission to heal." As I sat in the darkness surrounded by the sound of wind through pine trees and the distant call of an owl, I thought about Grandma Rose and how she'd understood that real love meant creating opportunities for growth rather than obstacles to independence. How she'd bought this cabin not to control my choices, but to ensure I had the freedom to make authentic decisions about my future. I thought about Austin and how he'd loved me not despite my complicated family history, but because of the strength and authenticity it had helped me develop. How he'd supported my healing journey without trying to fix me or change me or make me more convenient for his own comfort. I thought about Emma and how she'd transformed her disappointment about Jake into a mission that was helping thousands of families avoid similar trauma. How she'd turned her privilege into protection for people who didn't have access to the same resources and opportunities. And I thought about my parents and Jake facing the consequences of choices they'd made as adults while still convinced that I was somehow responsible for their discomfort, still believing that love meant never having to face accountability for harmful behavior. I hoped someday they would understand that my refusal to enable their dysfunction had been an act of love, not revenge. That holding them accountable for financial abuse and emotional manipulation had been an attempt to create space for authentic relationship rather than an effort to punish them for imperfection. But whether they ever reached that understanding or not, I was finally free from the obligation to manage their emotions or protect them from the natural consequences of their actions. I was free to love them from a distance while refusing to sacrifice my own well-being for their comfort. I was free to build a life based on my own values rather than their expectations. I was free to be exactly who I really was, surrounded by people who celebrated rather than tolerated my authentic self. As shooting stars began appearing in the mountain sky, I made a wish for everyone still trapped in family relationships that required them to be smaller, quieter, or less than who they really were. I wished for them the courage to choose authenticity over approval, growth over comfort, freedom over obligation. And I wished for them the kind of love I'd found in Colorado love that supported rather than controlled, celebrated rather than criticized, honored rather than diminished the fullness of who they were meant to become. The mountains stood silent around me, ancient and permanent, and utterly indifferent to human drama, offering the kind of perspective that comes only with distance and time. In their presence, I understood that my family's dysfunction was not a reflection of my worth, that their inability to love me authentically was not evidence of my unlovability, that their choice to prioritize control over connection was their loss, not mine. I was home finally and completely in a life I'd built with my own hands and filled with people who had chosen to love me exactly as I was. Have you ever had to choose between keeping peace in your family and protecting your own well-being? How do you find the courage to set boundaries with people who see your independence as betrayal rather than growth? Thank you for joining me on this journey of healing and transformation. If my story resonated with you, please like this video, subscribe for more stories about choosing authenticity over approval, and share this with anyone who might need to hear that they deserve relationships that celebrate rather than diminish who they really are. Remember, real family chooses to love you every day, not just when it's convenient for them. Until next time, keep choosing growth over comfort, truth over convenience, and authentic love over conditional acceptance. You deserve nothing less than relationships that honor the fullness of who you're meant to become.